I am Nia, 35 years old, and the silent founder of a financial technology empire. But to my family, I was always just the embarrassing disappointment. At exactly 6 in the evening on New Year's Eve, my phone buzzed with a voicemail from my mother, Brenda. Her voice dripped with that familiar icy condescension as she told me not to bother showing up to the family gala at my brother-in-law's exclusive country club. She said my thrift store aesthetic would just make things awkward for his wealthy investors. I did not shed a single tear. I simply sat in my supposedly cheap apartment, poured a glass of vintage champagne, and opened my secure laptop. With one click, I digitally signed the final merger documents for NovaPay, the startup I had quietly built from nothing. I had just sold it for $1.2 billion. Less than 7 hours later, my phone rang again. It was my brother Jamal, gasping for air, asking me what I had done because our father was hyperventilating in the country club lobby after reading the news on Forbes. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to build your success in silence while dealing with a toxic family that constantly underestimated your worth. The staging unit I was staying in was intentionally sparse and minimalist. My family thought it was all I could afford. They truly believed I was struggling to make ends meet in a bad neighborhood because I drove a 5-year-old sedan and completely refused to buy into the flashy lifestyle they worshipped. My sister Jasmine and her husband Kendrick were the absolute stars of the family. Kendrick ran a wealth management firm and made sure everyone in our social circle knew it. He wore tailored, bespoke suits and drove European sports cars he probably could not afford to maintain. Jasmine was the golden child, the one who gave my parents Reginald and Brenda the perfect image of black excellence they constantly craved. I was the dark cloud, the quiet one who worked constantly and never had anything to show for it in their highly judgmental eyes. I picked up my phone and listened to the voicemail again. Brenda sighed heavily into the receiver as if even dialing my number was an exhausting chore. Nia, she started, her tone sharp and hurried. Jasmine is stressing about the seating chart for the gala tonight at Kendrick's country club. Honestly, your thrift store aesthetic is just going to make things awkward for Kendrick's investors. You never dress the part, and we really need this night to go perfectly for him. Just stay home tonight. We will bring you some leftovers tomorrow. Happy New Year. Click. That was it. No apology, no hesitation, no regret. Just a casual and brutal dismissal on the biggest holiday of the year. They were effectively banning me from the family table because I did not look wealthy enough to sit next to them. If this had happened 5 years ago, I would have been entirely crushed. I would have cried until my eyes swelled and spent the night wondering why I was never good enough for my own mother. I would have questioned my own worth and asked myself why Reginald always looked at Jasmine with immense pride and looked at me with thinly veiled pity. But tonight, I felt absolutely nothing but a cold and sharp clarity. I deleted the voicemail. I walked over to the kitchen counter and popped the cork on a bottle of champagne that cost more than Kendrick's annual country club membership dues. I poured the golden liquid into a crystal flute and carried it to my laptop. The screen glowed bright in the dim room. My legal team was waiting on the secure conference link. For 5 years, I had poured my blood, sweat, and tears into NovaPay. I built the secure payment processing algorithms that half the major banks in the country were now using for daily transactions. And I did it entirely under a corporate holding name. No one in my family knew. They thought I was doing low-level freelance computer repairs and basic web design. The final merger contract was staring back at me. A massive financial conglomerate was acquiring NovaPay to integrate my technology into their global infrastructure. The numbers on the screen were absolutely staggering. $1.2 billion. I took a slow sip of the champagne, letting the crisp taste settle on my tongue. I thought about Jasmine laughing at my clothes last Thanksgiving. I thought about Reginald telling me I needed to learn how to be a winner like Kendrick so I would not die alone and broke. I smiled, pressed my finger to the trackpad, and clicked the digital signature box. The transaction was complete. The funds were locked and authorized. I was officially a billionaire. I spent the rest of the evening in total peace. I watched the city skyline from my living room window. I saw the fireworks explode over the downtown buildings at midnight, marking the start of a brand new year. My phone remained completely silent. No one from the gala texted me to say Happy New Year. Not Jasmine, not Reginald, not Brenda. They were too busy rubbing elbows with local politicians, drinking overpriced cocktails, and pretending to be American royalty. Then, at exactly 12:50 in the morning, my phone screen lit up in the dark room. It was my brother Jamal. Jamal was the only one in the family who mostly stayed out of the toxic drama, but he was terrified of our parents and always fell in line to avoid becoming their next target. Seeing his name flash on the screen at this hour sent a tiny ripple of curiosity through me. I pressed accept and put the phone to my ear. "Nia, what did you do?" Jamal yelled. He was panting heavily, his voice echoing slightly like he was hiding in a bathroom stall. I took a slow sip of my sparkling water. "What do you mean, Jamal? Happy New Year, by the way. Do not play with me, Nia." He practically begged, his voice cracking. Dad just collapsed into a chair in the main dining room. He saw a news alert from Forbes on his phone. It was breaking news about the NovaPay acquisition. It listed you as the sole founder and the buyer of Kendrick's parent company. He is hyperventilating, Nia. People are staring at our table. A slow and deliberate smile spread across my face. "Is he breathing?" I asked calmly. "Yes, he is breathing, but he is having a massive panic attack," Jamal stammered. "And Kendrick, Nia." Kendrick just ran into the men's room and threw up. He is literally vomiting in the sink right now. He checked the corporate filings on his phone. "The conglomerate you just bought owns the debt to his entire investment firm. You own his firm, Nia. You own everything." I walked over to the window and looked down at the quiet street below. "How was the seating chart?" I asked, my voice smooth and utterly devoid of sympathy. Did my absence make things less awkward for the investors? Jamal went dead silent on the other end of the line. He suddenly realized the sheer magnitude of what was happening and how long I had been holding this secret. "You planned this," he whispered in disbelief. "I did not plan their cruelty, Jamal," I replied. "I just planned my own success. Tell Mom not to worry about bringing me those leftovers tomorrow. I think I will be buying my own meals from now on." I hung up the phone. The power dynamic of my entire existence had just shifted on its axis in a matter of seconds. For 35 years, I was the scapegoat, the outcast, the poor sister, who needed to be hidden away so the golden child could shine brightly. They banned me from their table because they thought I was nothing and brought no value to their image. They had no idea that I had just bought the entire building they were standing in. And I knew with absolute certainty that the moment the sun came up on New Year's Day, they were all going to come looking for me. I did not have to wait long. At exactly 9 in the morning on New Year's Day, the secure intercom system in my living room chimed. I was already awake, wearing a silk robe and drinking a fresh espresso while looking out over the city. I walked over to the panel and pressed the button. The voice of my private concierge echoed through the speaker. "Miss Nia," he said politely, "there are 4 people down here in the lobby demanding to come up. They do not have an appointment, but they are claiming it is a severe family emergency and they are getting quite loud." "Send them up," I replied, my voice completely flat. "But hold my brother Jamal in the lobby. I only want the other 4. I knew Jamal was the only one who actually felt guilty about how they treated me. This confrontation was not meant for him. This was for the people who had spent my entire life making me feel completely invisible. I walked over to the kitchen island, set my espresso cup down, and waited. My real home was not a staging unit. I lived in a $12 million duplex penthouse that occupied the top 2 floors of a highly exclusive glass high-rise. The elevator was programmed to open directly into my private foyer. For the last 5 years, I had kept this place a complete secret. I hosted family gatherings at that cheap rental unit downtown just to avoid their endless judgment and to protect my peace. But today, there was no more hiding. The heavy steel doors of the private elevator slid open with a soft chime. Jasmine, Kendrick, Reginald, and Brenda stepped out into my foyer. They had clearly rushed over the second the sun came up. Kendrick looked absolutely terrible. His expensive custom suit from the night before was deeply wrinkled, and he had massive dark circles under his eyes. Jasmine was clutching her designer handbag so tightly, her knuckles were white. But the moment they stepped off the elevator and looked around, their anger completely evaporated into sheer shock. They stood frozen on my imported marble floors. They stared at the floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a panoramic view of the skyline. They looked at the floating glass staircase and the massive crystal chandelier hanging above the dining room table. Brenda actually let out a small gasp and covered her mouth. They had come here ready to scream at the poor sister who somehow caused a public scene. Instead, they had just walked into a fortress of wealth that made Kendrick's country club look like a cheap diner. "Close your mouth, Jasmine," I said calmly, leaning against the marble counter. "You are going to catch a fly." Reginald was the first to snap out of his trance. My father had spent his entire life commanding every room he walked into. He was a retired corporate manager who ruled our house with an iron fist, and he refused to let my sudden display of wealth intimidate him. He marched past the velvet sofa and stopped a few feet away from me. He did not say Happy New Year. He did not apologize for banning me from the family table 12 hours earlier. He did not even ask how I managed to build a billion-dollar company without telling them. He simply looked at me with that same cold, authoritarian glare and delivered an order. "Family shares everything, Naya. That is the rule in this house." Reginald pointed a stern finger at me. "I do not know what kind of secret games you have been playing for the last 5 years, but it ends today. You are going to transfer the funds to pay off Kendrick's business loans by noon. Your sister is not going to lose her house because you decided to pull a selfish corporate stunt." I actually laughed. The sound echoed in the massive kitchen. It was a genuine laugh of pure disbelief. The absolute audacity of this man standing in my home demanding my money to save the golden child. "Share everything," I asked, raising an eyebrow. "Are we really talking about sharing right now, Dad?" Because I seem to remember a very different rule when it came to family resources. Like when I got accepted into my dream college, and you and Mom suddenly decided to share my entire college savings account to pay for Jasmine's $100,000 destination wedding. You forced me to take out massive student loans while she was sipping champagne in the Bahamas. I paid those loans off by myself working 3 jobs, so no, Reginald. We do not share everything. The Bank of Nia is permanently closed." Jasmine stepped forward, her face turning red with sudden rage. "How dare you bring that up?" she practically screamed. "That was over 10 years ago. You are always so petty and jealous of me. Kendrick is your family. He is a prominent wealth manager in this city, and his reputation is on the line because of your stupid buyout. You owe us this money to fix what you just broke." "I did not break anything, Jasmine," I replied, my voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "I just bought the company that holds his leash." Kendrick finally found his nerve. He pushed past his wife and tried to step into my personal space, trying to use his height to physically intimidate me, just like he did to his junior employees. But I did not flinch. I just stared right back into his bloodshot eyes. He was sweating heavily, despite the cool air conditioning in the penthouse. "Listen to me very carefully, you arrogant little girl," Kendrick sneered, trying to sound menacing. "You think you are so smart because you sold a tech startup. You think you can play in the big leagues. But I know what you did. You only bought my parent company to target my specific firm. That is a direct violation of federal trading laws. It is textbook insider trading and market manipulation. I already called my lawyers on the way over here." He leaned closer, pointing a shaking finger at my face. "By tomorrow morning, I'm going to have the federal government freezing every single asset you own. You will be sitting in a jail cell, and I will be taking control of this ridiculous penthouse as collateral for the damages you caused my firm. Now you are going to sign over the deed to this property right now, and I might tell my legal team to show you some mercy." He stood there breathing heavily, expecting me to crumble. He expected me to panic at the word federal, just like he manipulated his wealthy clients into panicking when the market dipped. He thought I was still the quiet girl who sat in the corner during Thanksgiving dinners while he bragged about his stock portfolios. I did not scream. I did not call security. I simply smiled. It was a slow and freezing smile that made Kendrick's confident smirk falter almost instantly. "You called your lawyers?" I asked, tilting my head slightly. "That is so interesting, Kendrick, because I spent my morning looking at something much more reliable than your lawyers." I turned around and walked over to the kitchen island. I picked up my sleek silver tablet and tapped the screen to wake it up. The glow of the display illuminated the absolute silence in the room. Reginald, Brenda, and Jasmine were watching me with a mixture of confusion and growing dread. They could sense that the power had not just shifted, it had completely vanished from their hands. I turned back to face them, holding the tablet. I tapped a secure folder that I had downloaded directly from the newly acquired corporate servers at exactly midnight. "You see, Kendrick?" I began casually pacing across the room. "I did not need to use insider trading to ruin your life. When you buy a massive financial conglomerate, you get unrestricted access to every single internal audit and unredacted financial record of their subsidiary firms. And as the new owner, I decided to do a little light reading on your specific wealth management branch." Kendrick's face went completely pale. All the false bravado drained out of him in a single second. He took a step backward, his eyes fixed on the tablet in my hand like it was a loaded weapon. I looked directly at my parents. Reginald was still trying to maintain his tough posture, but Brenda was beginning to look nervous. "Mom. Dad." I said, my voice completely steady. "You have been telling everyone for years that Kendrick is a financial genius. You trusted him implicitly. But according to these internal audits, Kendrick has not made a successful trade in over 4 years. His firm is completely bankrupt." I swiped my finger across the screen, pulling up the final report. "He is not running a wealth management firm," I continued, locking eyes with my father. "He is running a glorified Ponzi scheme. He has been taking money from new investors just to pay off the massive margins he lost from the old ones. And do you want to know who his biggest victims are?" I took 2 steps toward Reginald and handed him the tablet. "Read the highlighted section, Dad. Read exactly how your golden son-in-law has been funding Jasmine's designer handbags and those luxury vacations to Dubai." Reginald snatched the tablet from my hand, glaring at me as if the screen was lying. But as his eyes scanned the highlighted text, his shoulders began to violently shake. The tablet almost slipped from his grip. "What does it say?" Brenda asked, her voice trembling as she grabbed his arm. "What is she talking about?" Reginald looked up and his eyes were completely hollow. He stared at Kendrick with a look of pure and utter devastation. "He remortgaged the house," Reginald whispered, his voice cracking. "He secretly remortgaged our retirement estate. Every single dollar of our pension fund. It is all gone. He used our entire life savings to cover his bad trades." The silence that followed was suffocating. The reality of what Kendrick had done was crashing down on them, suffocating the life out of their perfect family image. But the truth was, I had not even reached the bottom of the rot yet. The real nightmare for the golden child was only just beginning. Jasmine was the first to react. The moment Reginald said the words life savings, she did not turn to Kendrick with anger or betrayal. Instead, she immediately burst into tears. It was a flawless performance. Her shoulders heaved and she buried her face in her hands, sobbing loudly. Brenda, completely ignoring the fact that Kendrick had just robbed her blind, rushed forward to wrap her arms around her golden child. "How could you do this?" Brenda screamed over Jasmine's fake sobs. Her face was twisted with pure hatred. "How could you illegally hack into Kendrick's private business files just to humiliate him? You are trying to destroy your sister's marriage because you are bitter and single. You have always been jealous of Jasmine, and now you are making up lies to tear our family apart." I stood completely still, watching my mother defend the man who had just stolen her retirement. I did not defend my relationship status. I did not raise my voice. I simply let her scream. Reginald stood up straight, trying to physically shake off the devastating blow. He was a man who worshipped his public image above all else. The thought of his country club friends finding out his son-in-law was a fraud was clearly worse to him than losing his pension. He pulled his shoulders back and puffed out his chest, trying to reclaim his authority. "Stop crying, Jasmine," Reginald commanded, his voice echoing in the penthouse. "We are not going to let this ruin us. Kendrick, you made a terrible mistake, but we are going to fix this quietly. I will liquidate the remaining assets from the family trust. I will sell the summer house and cash out my remaining stock options. We will cover the deficit in your firm and save the family name from this public scandal. We will not let Nia's vicious little stunt break this family." He looked at me with pure disgust, as if I was the criminal. He actually thought he could buy his way out of this reality. I looked at my father with completely dead, unsympathetic eyes. "You cannot do that, Dad," I said, my voice dropping to a low, steady pitch. "Do not tell me what I can and cannot do," Reginald snapped, pointing a shaking finger at me. "I am still the head of this family. I will pay off whoever he owes this money to, and we will be done with this nonsense." I slowly shook my head. "You do not understand, Dad," I said, taking a step closer to him. "You cannot cover Kendrick's deficit because the deficit is not a few $100,000. Kendrick is $8 million in the hole, and the conglomerate I bought last night holds every single cent of that debt. I am the parent company. I am the sole creditor. The person Kendrick owes $8 million to is me." The air in the room felt like it had been sucked out through the floor-to-ceiling windows. Reginald lowered his hand, his mouth opening but no sound coming out. Kendrick looked like he was going to pass out right on my marble floor. The realization finally hit them. I was not just rich. I was their sole creditor. I held the keys to their entire future. The second Jasmine realized Reginald could not bail them out, her mask completely slipped. She dropped her hands from her face. There were no real tears in her eyes. The crying act stopped instantly, and her expression turned vicious. She stepped away from Brenda and marched toward me, her fists clenched at her sides. "You are going to forgive that debt right now, Nia?" Jasmine demanded, her voice harsh and demanding. "You have $1 billion. $8 million is nothing to you. You owe this to us. I am the one who gave Mom and Dad grandchildren. I am the one who built the perfect family image while you were hiding in your cheap apartment. I deserve that inheritance money Kendrick took. We needed it to maintain our lifestyle." She was screaming so loud she did not even realize what she had just confessed. Brenda gasped, stepping back from her golden child. "You knew?" Brenda whispered, her voice trembling with shock. "Jasmine, you knew he was taking our retirement money." "Of course I knew," Jasmine snapped, turning on our mother without a single ounce of guilt. "How do you think we paid for the Dubai trips, Mom? How do you think we kept up with the country club fees? You wanted me to be perfect, so I was perfect. You cannot punish me for doing exactly what you raised me to do." Before Brenda could even process the sheer betrayal of her favorite daughter, the private elevator chimed. The heavy steel doors slid open. I had told the concierge to send Jamal up after 5 minutes, and his timing was absolutely perfect. Jamal stepped into the foyer. He had heard Jasmine's entire screaming confession through the open elevator doors. He looked at Jasmine and Kendrick with a level of disgust I had never seen on my brother's face before. Jamal usually stayed quiet to survive the family dynamics, but today he finally reached his breaking point. He walked past our shocked parents and stood right next to me, forming a physical barrier between me and Jasmine. "You are sick, Jasmine," Jamal said, his voice shaking with anger. "You stole their retirement to buy designer bags and you think Nia owes you something. You and Kendrick are parasites. Stay out of this," Jamal Kendrick warned, trying to puff out his chest again but failing miserably. "No, I am not staying out of it," Jamal shouted back. "Are you going to tell Mom and Dad how you funded the rest of your fake lifestyle, Kendrick? Are you going to tell them about the credit cards?" Reginald looked back and forth between his two sons. What credit cards? Reginald asked, his voice barely a whisper. Jamal pulled a thick envelope out of his jacket pocket and threw it directly at Kendrick's chest. It hit him and scattered across the marble floor. They are credit card statements, Jamal said, breathing heavily. Jasmine and Kendrick stole my social security number 3 years ago. They opened 5 massive lines of credit in my name and maxed them all out to pay for their luxury cars. My credit score is completely ruined. I could not even get a loan for a reliable car to get to work because my own sister committed identity fraud to keep up her rich housewife act. The family fractured completely right in my living room. The perfect image they had maintained for 35 years shattered into a million irreversible pieces. Jasmine and Kendrick had systematically robbed every single person in the room except me. Brenda collapsed onto the velvet sofa, sobbing hysterically, but this time, it was real. The daughter she had worshipped, the daughter she had literally banned me from New Year's Eve to protect, had completely destroyed them. But Reginald was not ready to surrender his pride. His entire worldview was built on controlling his children, and he could not accept that I was the one holding all the cards. Cornered and desperate, he resorted to his ultimate weapon. The same weapon he had used to keep me in line my entire childhood. Parental rejection. Reginald walked up to me, his face red and his jaw clenched. He pointed a rigid finger directly at my face. "Listen to me, Nia," he ordered, his voice completely devoid of any paternal warmth. "Kendrick is family. Jasmine is family. We handle our problems internally. You are going to sign a contract forgiving that $8 million debt right now. You are going to clear your sister's name, and you are going to pay off Jamal's credit cards with your new billionaire money." I looked at him calmly. "And if I do not, Dad?" "Then you are no longer my daughter," Reginald stated coldly, staring right into my eyes. "If you do not clear this debt right now, we will disown you. You will never be welcome in our home again. You will be completely cut off from this family forever." He thought the threat of being unloved would break me. He thought I was still the little girl who desperately wanted her father's approval. He had absolutely no idea that he had just handed me the match to burn their entire world down. I did not shed a single tear at my father's ultimatum. 35 years of psychological conditioning told me I should fall to my knees and beg for his approval. But that weak version of Nia was dead. She died the exact moment Brenda left that voicemail banning me from the New Year's Eve table. I looked at Reginald and gave him a slow, deliberate nod. "You want to disown me, Dad?" I asked, my voice echoing off the high ceilings. "That is entirely fine. But before you officially cut me out of this family forever, you should probably hear what you are actually sacrificing your life savings to protect." I turned my back on him and walked over to the sleek, smart home panel mounted on the wall. I tapped the screen, dimming the bright morning lights and connecting my phone to the penthouse's surround sound audio system. The silence in the room was so heavy it felt suffocating. Jasmine shot a terrified glance at Kendrick. She could sense that the ground was about to completely fall out from beneath her designer shoes. "Last night, while you were all sipping expensive cocktails and laughing about my cheap clothes, I had a few of my new corporate executives attending that very same gala," I said, tapping my screen to open an audio file. "One of them happened to be seated right behind your exclusive VIP table. And since he knew I was finalizing the acquisition, he decided to record a little voice memo of the man whose company I was buying." I pressed play. High-definition audio instantly filled the penthouse, broadcasting perfectly through the invisible ceiling speakers. The clinking of crystal glasses and the low hum of country club chatter echoed around us. And then, Jasmine's voice cut through the noise, crystal clear and dripping with absolute arrogance. "Do not worry," baby Jasmine's recorded voice laughed. "Once Dad signs the last of the equity over next week, we will file for bankruptcy and move to Dubai by February. We just have to keep smiling until the ink is dry." Then Kendrick's recorded voice chimed in, smooth and entirely heartless. "What about your parents, Jasmine? If we default on those loans, the bank will seize their retirement house immediately. They will have absolutely nothing." "I do not care," Jasmine's voice replied casually over the sound of her sipping a drink. They can go live in a trailer for all I care. They gave me everything I wanted my whole life, so this is just their final contribution. Plus, we will be in Dubai. It will not be our problem. I pressed pause. The audio cut out instantly, leaving a ringing dead silence in my massive living room. The absolute destruction of the golden child was finally complete. The undeniable truth had come straight from her own mouth. Reginald let out a sound that I had never heard a grown man make. It was a hollow, gut-wrenching gasp, as if someone had just punched him directly in the chest. He staggered backward, his knees giving out completely, and collapsed into one of my velvet dining chairs. The color entirely drained from his face as he stared at the daughter he had worshipped his entire life. The tough authoritarian patriarch was gone, replaced by a broken old man who had just realized his favorite child viewed him as nothing but a disposable bank account. Brenda reacted with pure primal denial. She let out a piercing scream and lunged across the marble floor toward me, trying to slap the phone out of my hand. I easily stepped backward out of her reach. She missed, lost her balance, and crashed to her knees right in front of the kitchen island. She did not try to get up. She just stayed on the floor, sobbing hysterically, her hands covering her ears, as if she could somehow block out the recording she had already heard. Jasmine was completely frozen. Her eyes were wide with sheer terror. The flawless image she had manipulated for decades was entirely obliterated. She looked at Reginald, then at Brenda, but neither of them reached out to comfort her. For the first time in her life, she was utterly alone in her own mess. Jamal let out a harsh, bitter laugh from his spot by the elevator. A trailer, he repeated, shaking his head in absolute disgust. You were going to leave Mom and Dad in a trailer while you fled to Dubai. You really are a monster, Jasmine. Kendrick was not looking at Jasmine or my devastated parents. He was looking at me, his eyes darting frantically around the room as he desperately tried to calculate a way out of this nightmare. The arrogant wealth manager who had threatened to have me arrested just 10 minutes ago was now visibly shaking, sweating through his expensive suit. Listen to me, Nia, Kendrick stammered, taking a cautious step forward and raising his hands in a gesture of surrender. We can make a deal. I will leave Jasmine. I will sign the divorce papers today. Just let me keep the firm. I can restructure the debt. I can pay you back over time. Just do not dissolve the company. Jasmine whipped her head around, staring at her husband in absolute shock. You are abandoning me, she screamed, her voice cracking. Kendrick did not even look at her. Shut up, Jasmine, he snapped, keeping his desperate, pleading eyes locked entirely on me. Nia, please. You have the power to fix this. I looked at Kendrick and felt a wave of absolute disgust. I am not negotiating with you, Kendrick. I said, my voice dropping to a freezing whisper. And I am certainly not forgiving your massive debt. You thought you could steal millions of dollars and just fly away to a luxury resort. But you missed one very important detail about the company you work for. I placed my phone face down on the marble counter. When I finalized the acquisition at midnight, I became legally obligated to report any financial irregularities to the authorities. My legal team handed over your unredacted financial audits to the Securities and Exchange Commission at exactly 8:00 this morning. Kendrick's jaw dropped. His hands started to violently tremble. They already have the proof, Kendrick. I continued, stepping closer to him until he was forced to back away. They have the fraudulent margin calls. They have the forged signatures on my parents' mortgage. They have every single fake document you used to prop up your Ponzi scheme. You are not going to Dubai by February. You are going to federal prison. Kendrick panicked. The reality of a federal indictment hit him like a freight train. He spun around, abandoning his wife and his ruined in-laws, and sprinted full speed toward the private elevator. He slammed his hand against the call button, repeatedly panting like a cornered animal. But when the heavy steel doors slid open, his escape route was completely blocked. Two of my private security guards, dressed in immaculate black suits, were already standing inside the elevator car. They stepped out, towering over Kendrick, and crossed their arms, forming an impenetrable wall. Going somewhere, Kendrick? I asked casually, leaning against the counter. The authorities will be waiting for you in the lobby. I suggest you go quietly. Kendrick collapsed against the wall, sliding down to the floor in total defeat, burying his face in his hands. Jasmine, realizing that her husband was entirely useless and her parents were completely broken, turned her attention back to me. She crawled across the marble floor, closing the distance between us, and grabbed the hem of my silk pants. Nia. Please, Jasmine begged, hot tears streaming down her ruined makeup. Please do not do this. We are sisters. We are blood. You cannot do this to your own family. I will do anything. I will work for you. Just please stop the investigation. I looked down at the golden child, the sister who had made my life a living hell for 3 decades. I reached down, grabbed her wrists, and forcefully removed her hands from my clothes. You banned me from the family table when you thought I had nothing, Jasmine. I said, my voice completely void of emotion. You told me I was not good enough to sit next to your wealthy friends, but now that I own the building, you do not get a seat at all. I looked up at Reginald and Brenda. They were both weeping softly, unable to look me in the eye. They had sacrificed their entire relationship with me to protect an illusion, and now they were left with absolutely nothing. I am not going to let you go homeless, Mom and Dad, I said quietly, breaking the silence. My lawyers have already secured a small, modest condo in a secure building across town. You can live there rent-free for the rest of your lives. But you will never have my phone number. You will never know where I am traveling. You will never have access to my wealth or my peace again. You chose your perfect daughter. Now you get to live with her. I signaled to the tall security guards. Escort them out, I ordered, turning my back on them for the final time. The silence in the penthouse was thick and suffocating. Reginald stared at me, completely dumbfounded. He opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. He was entirely paralyzed by the sheer force of my refusal. For my entire life, I had been the designated family scapegoat, the one who quietly absorbed the financial and emotional blows so Jasmine could flawlessly thrive. He was so incredibly used to me bowing my head and accepting his financial abuse that my hard rejection left him entirely speechless. But the bank was closed, and I meant every single word. That is when Kendrick decided it was his turn to play the hero. He could not handle the massive shift in power that had just occurred in my kitchen. Kendrick had built his entire fragile identity around being the wealthy savior of our family. He wore custom-tailored suits, imported Italian leather shoes, and constantly flashed luxury watches that cost more than my entire college tuition. He thrived on the blind worship my parents gave him. Seeing me strip away his authority in a single sentence was simply too much for his massive ego to process. He pushed past my father, effectively shoving Reginald aside so he could take absolute control of the room. Kendrick adjusted the lapels of his wrinkled suit, attempting to regain that slick and untouchable wealth manager persona he used to manipulate his wealthy clients. He took 3 slow, deliberate steps across the imported marble floor toward me. He was a tall man, and he intentionally stepped deep into my personal space, trying to use his physical size to intimidate me. He looked down at me with a classic, arrogant smirk. He truly believed I was still that quiet girl who used to sit in the corner at Thanksgiving dinners while he loudly bragged about his massive stock portfolios and his exclusive golf trips. You think you are so incredibly smart? Nia, Kendrick sneered, his voice dripping with heavy condescension. You think because you got lucky and sold some little software program that you can suddenly play in the big leagues. But you have absolutely no idea how real corporate finance works. You are completely out of your depth here. He leaned closer, pointing a manicured, shaking finger directly at my face. I know exactly what you did. He continued, his tone turning malicious and threatening. You did not just randomly buy the parent conglomerate last night. You targeted my firm specifically. You used confidential family information to execute a hostile corporate takeover just to ruin my life and my business. That is textbook insider trading, Nia. It is a severe violation of federal trading laws, and it is highly illegal. He started throwing around complex financial buzzwords, hoping to confuse and terrify me. He talked loudly about market manipulation, hostile corporate espionage, and fiduciary breaches. He spoke with the rapid-fire cadence of a man who was used to bullying junior analysts into utter submission. He really thought I was just some lucky computer nerd who did not understand the complex legalities of massive corporate acquisitions. He had absolutely no idea that I had spent the last 5 years sitting in secure boardrooms with the most ruthless financial lawyers on the East Coast. Jasmine let out a loud, dramatic sigh of relief behind him. She crossed her arms and smiled smugly at me, entirely convinced that her brilliant husband had just legally cornered me. Reginald nodded in agreement, his posture straightening up immediately. Brenda actually gasped and clutched Reginald's arm when Kendrick mentioned federal laws. They all actually believed Kendrick's desperate bluff. They wanted so desperately to believe that I was a criminal because it was the only possible way they could justify my sudden massive success. If I was a criminal, then they were still the good guys in this story. You hear that? Nia? Jasmine snapped, stepping out from behind her husband to gloat. You are going to jail. You completely ruined our New Year's Eve, and now you are going to lose everything because you wanted to play a stupid petty prank. You should have just stayed in your cheap apartment like Mom told you to. Kendrick held up his hand to silence his wife. Let me handle this, Jasmine, he said, keeping his bloodshot eyes locked entirely on me. I already called my legal team on the ride over here. Kendrick lied smoothly. I could see a single bead of sweat rolling down his temple, but he forced his voice to remain steady. They are currently drafting an emergency federal injunction. By tomorrow morning, I am going to have a judge freeze every single asset you own. Your bank accounts, your corporate stock options, and this ridiculous apartment will be completely locked down. You will be sitting in a federal holding cell by the end of the week. He stood there breathing heavily, staring down at me. He expected me to panic. He expected me to start hyperventilating at the threat of federal prison. He thought the sheer terror of losing my newfound wealth would make me crumble instantly. Then he decided to offer me a fake lifeline. He took another step forward, practically trapping me against the marble kitchen counter. Because we are family, he said, his voice dropping to a fake sympathetic whisper, I am willing to call my lawyers off and keep you out of handcuffs. But you need to compensate my firm for the severe market damages you caused this morning. You are going to transfer the deed of this $12 million penthouse to my name immediately. It will serve as collateral while my team audits your highly suspicious business practices. If you sign the property over to me right now, I will manage the fallout and we will forget this entire embarrassing morning ever happened. I let the silence stretch out for a long, agonizing moment. I looked at his hands resting on the counter. Despite his highly aggressive posture, his fingers were trembling slightly. The vein in his neck was pulsing rapidly. He was bleeding out financially, and he was desperately trying to use my penthouse as a massive tourniquet. It was an absolutely pathetic display of toxic entitlement. I did not flinch. I did not take a step back. I looked deep into Kendrick's eyes, and I saw nothing but pure, unadulterated terror hiding right behind his arrogant facade. He was projecting. Every single word he just said about federal crimes and illegal trading was an accidental confession of his own dark reality. I did not scream for my private security guards to remove him. I did not raise my voice to defend my honor. I simply smiled. It was not a warm or forgiving smile. It was a slow and freezing smile that made Kendrick's confident smirk falter almost instantly. His eyes darted nervously around the massive room, suddenly realizing that his ultimate intimidation tactic had completely and utterly failed. I turned my back to him, walking calmly over to the center of the kitchen island. I reached out and picked up my sleek silver tablet. The screen lit up in my hand, holding the complete and unredacted truth. It was finally time to show my family exactly who the real criminal in the room was. I did not hand the tablet directly to Kendrick. I looked right past his sweating face and locked eyes with my father. With a swift and deliberate motion, I slid the sleek silver device across the smooth marble island. It glided effortlessly and stopped perfectly right in front of Reginald. The screen was glaringly bright in the dim room, displaying a series of highly classified internal financial audits that had been legally transferred to my secure server at exactly 1 minute past midnight. Reginald looked down at the glowing screen with a deep frown. Kendrick suddenly realized exactly what was on that tablet. He lunged forward desperately, trying to snatch the device off the counter before my father could read it, but my brother Jamal was significantly faster. Jamal stepped forward and shoved Kendrick's shoulder hard enough to make the wealth manager stumble backward and nearly lose his footing on the marble floor. "Read it, Dad," I instructed, my voice cutting through the heavy tension in the room like a perfectly sharpened blade. "Read the highlighted sections on page 4. Take your time." Reginald slowly picked up the tablet. He was a man who had spent his entire career reading corporate reports, so I knew he would understand the complex spreadsheets immediately. As his eyes began to scan the first page, the confident and authoritarian posture he had maintained for my entire life began to visibly fracture. "You have spent the last 6 years treating Kendrick like the absolute financial savior of this family," I said, stepping around the kitchen island, so there was nothing between me and my parents. "You bragged about his massive investment returns to your wealthy friends at the country club. You constantly told me I needed to find a man exactly like him, so I would not end up a failure. But those returns were completely fabricated. Everything you admire about this man is a total illusion." Kendrick frantically shook his head, his hands raised defensively. "She is lying," Reginald Kendrick shouted, his voice cracking with pure panic. "Those documents are forged. They are unfinished quarterly estimates. She manipulated the data to make me look bad." I did not even look at Kendrick. I kept my eyes entirely fixed on my father. "These are the final unredacted audits from the parent conglomerate you work for, Kendrick," I stated calmly. "The company I now completely own. As the new majority shareholder, I have the highest level of security clearance, and I spent the early hours of this morning reviewing your specific portfolio. You left a massive digital trail of fraud, and I have every single receipt." The silence in the penthouse became deafening as Reginald swiped to the next page of the report. His breathing became incredibly shallow. "Kendrick has not made a single successful trade in over 4 years, Dad," I continued, making sure every single word echoed clearly in the massive space. "His entire wealth management firm is completely bankrupt. He has been taking massive amounts of money from new clients just to pay off the catastrophic margin calls he lost from his older clients. He is not running a prestigious investment firm. He is running a glorified Ponzi scheme." Brenda violently shook her head, refusing to accept the reality that was unfolding right in front of her. "No, that is completely impossible," Brenda argued, her voice trembling as she stepped closer to Reginald. "Kendrick handles all of our retirement accounts, Nia. He manages the family trust. He sends us the official statements every single month. Our portfolios are thriving. We just gained 12% last quarter." "Those statements are fake, Mom," I replied softly but firmly. "He generated them on his personal laptop to keep you quiet and compliant. But when his trading losses became too massive to hide, he needed a huge injection of liquid capital to keep the federal regulators off his back. He needed millions of dollars immediately just to keep the lights on at his fake firm, and he knew exactly who trusted him enough to sign blank financial documents without ever bothering to read the fine print." Reginald's hands began to violently shake. The tablet was trembling so hard in his grip that he could barely read the text. The color completely drained from his face, leaving him looking pale and incredibly fragile. He swallowed hard, his eyes glued to the bright red numbers at the bottom of the spreadsheet. "Look at the asset collateral listed on page 6, Dad," I said, delivering the final devastating blow. "Look at what he used to secure his last desperate round of funding. Kendrick did not just lose your liquid retirement funds. He secretly remortgaged your entire retirement estate. The house you and Mom spent 30 years paying off. The house you plan to live in for the rest of your peaceful lives. He leveraged the entire property to the absolute maximum legal limit, and he lost every single penny of it on terrible, high-risk trades." Brenda let out a wounded gasp. She grabbed Reginald's arm, her perfectly manicured fingernails digging into his suit jacket. "Reginald, what does this mean?" she pleaded, her voice rising in sheer panic. "Reginald, tell me she is lying. Tell me our house is fine." Reginald could not speak. He simply stared at the screen as the horrific reality of his situation crushed his entire worldview. He did not own his home anymore. His golden son-in-law had handed the deed over to the bank. Reginald dropped the tablet onto the marble counter. It landed with a heavy thud that made everyone in the room flinch. "You do not own your home anymore, Dad," I said, my voice entirely devoid of any pity or comfort. "The bank owns it. And because the conglomerate I bought last night holds all the outstanding debt for Kendrick's firm, I technically own the bank that holds your mortgage." Kendrick fell to his knees. The slick, arrogant facade was entirely gone. He looked like a pathetic, broken man. The market took an unpredictable downturn. Reginald, Kendrick pleaded, crawling slightly toward my father. "I just needed a few more months to flip the assets and recover the losses. I was going to pay you back with massive interest. You know I would never intentionally hurt this family. I love Jasmine. I love you guys. You intentionally targeted them because they were incredibly easy marks." Kendrick Jamal spat out, looking down at his brother-in-law with pure disgust. "You knew they worshipped the ground Jasmine walked on, and you weaponized their blind love for your wife to steal their entire life savings. You are an absolute predator." Jasmine stood frozen in the center of the foyer. She was staring at Kendrick with wide, terrified eyes, but she was not looking at him like a betrayed wife. She was looking at him like a cornered animal who realized her primary source of funding had just been permanently severed. She did not rush over to comfort her weeping mother. She did not yell at Kendrick for stealing from her parents. She just clutched her expensive designer handbag tightly against her chest, trying to calculate how this massive disaster was going to impact her own luxury lifestyle. "You are completely broke, Dad," I said, breaking the heavy silence and forcing Reginald to finally look at me. "You banned me from your New Year's Eve table because my clothes were not expensive enough for your elite social circle. You told me I was an embarrassment to the family name, but the tragic irony is that as of this morning, I am the only person in this entire room who actually has a positive net worth." Reginald slowly raised his head and looked at me. The authoritarian patriarch who had controlled my entire existence was gone. In his place stood an utterly defeated man who had sacrificed his relationship with his only loyal daughter to protect a massive lie. The perfect family image he had spent decades meticulously building had just burned to the ground in less than 5 minutes, and I had not even struck the final match yet. Jasmine did not stay frozen for long. The moment the absolute reality of her financial ruin settled into her perfectly styled head, she resorted to the only survival tactic she had ever known. She turned on the waterworks. It was a flawless, instantaneous performance. She let out a loud, dramatic wail and dropped to her knees right next to Kendrick. But she did not reach out to hold her husband's hand. She covered her face and sobbed, shaking her shoulders in a theatrical display of utter victimhood. The sound of the golden child crying acted like a hypnotic trigger for our mother. Brenda completely snapped out of her state of paralyzing shock. She did not look at the tablet that proved her retirement was gone. She did not scream at Kendrick for secretly remortgaging the house she had raised her children in. Instead, she physically stepped over the undeniable truth to rush to Jasmine's side. She dropped to the floor and wrapped her arms tightly around her weeping daughter, stroking her hair and glaring up at me with a look of pure, unadulterated hatred. "How could you do this?" Brenda screamed, her voice echoing sharply against the glass walls. "How could you illegally hack into his private files just to humiliate him like this? You are a monster!" I stood there looking down at the two of them. It was a masterclass in psychological delusion. The man kneeling right next to them had just financially gutted our entire family, and my mother was looking at me like I was the one holding the knife. "You have always been jealous of your sister," Brenda continued, pointing an angry, shaking finger at me from the floor. "From the time you were little, you could never stand it when she got any attention. You are trying to destroy Jasmine's marriage because you are bitter and single. You cannot find a man to love you, so you decided to use your little computer skills to ruin the only successful relationship in this family. You manipulated those documents to tear us apart." I did not cross my arms. I did not raise my voice to defend my honor. And I certainly did not defend my relationship status. I did not need to explain to my mother that I was single by choice because I had spent the last 5 years building a $1 billion empire while she was busy bragging about her fraudulent son-in-law. I just let her scream. I let the sheer absurdity of her accusations fill the room. I wanted to watch exactly how far she would go to protect the illusion of her perfect family. Jamal could not stomach it. He took a furious step toward our mother, his hands clenched into tight fists. "Are you completely out of your mind?" "Mom," Jamal yelled, his voice cracking with sheer frustration. "Did you not just hear a single word Nia said? Kendrick stole your house. He stole my identity. He is a criminal. Nia did not hack anything. She owns the company. She is trying to show you the truth, and you are sitting on the floor calling her bitter." "Do not speak to me like that." Brenda snapped right back, totally unfazed by his logic. "Nia is manipulating you too. She has all this money now, and she thinks she can just buy her way into controlling us. She probably paid someone to fabricate these reports. Kendrick is a professional. He would never do something like this." Kendrick, hearing my mother desperately defend him, actually tried to use her delusion to his advantage. He wiped the sweat from his forehead and looked up at Reginald, who was still sitting in the velvet chair, completely paralyzed by shock. "Brenda is right," Reginald Kendrick pleaded, his voice taking on a sickeningly persuasive tone. "Nia is the new majority shareholder. She has the power to alter the internal data before she showed it to you. She fabricated the margin calls to force my firm into liquidation so she could absorb my client list. This is a hostile takeover. She is framing me to justify shutting down my branch." It was so incredibly pathetic, I actually felt a brief flash of secondhand embarrassment. I looked down at Kendrick kneeling on my imported marble floor, desperately trying to convince a broken old man that a $1 billion financial tech company cared about stealing a bankrupt wealth management branch. I stepped away from the kitchen island and walked slowly toward the group huddled on the floor. My heels clicked sharply against the marble, demanding total silence. Even Jasmine paused her fake sobbing to look up at me in fear. "You really are incredible, Mom," I said, my voice low and dangerously calm. "You are sitting in a $12 million penthouse that I own outright. You are looking at classified financial documents from a conglomerate that I just purchased for over $1 billion. And your first instinct is to accuse me of being a bitter single woman who is just jealous of a man facing federal prison time." I stopped right in front of Brenda, looking directly into her eyes. The cognitive dissonance was entirely staggering. "I do not need to destroy Jasmine's marriage, Mom," I stated plainly. "Kendrick's massive financial crimes have already done that. I do not need to fabricate documents to humiliate you. You have spent my entire life humiliating yourselves by worshipping a con artist just because he wore a nice suit and bought you expensive dinners with other people's money." Brenda opened her mouth to argue, but I immediately cut her off. I held up my hand, silencing her before she could utter another toxic word. "Do not try to gaslight me in my own home," I warned, my tone turning freezing cold. "You cannot manipulate the situation away. You cannot sweep $8 million of missing funds under the rug just because it makes you uncomfortable. The money is completely gone. Your house is gone. Your perfect country club reputation is gone. And defending the parasite who took it all from you will not bring any of it back." Jasmine realized that Brenda was losing the battle. The golden child could see that the shield she had relied on her entire life was completely useless against undeniable financial facts. She dropped the crying act instantly. The tears vanished from her face, leaving behind a look of desperate, vicious panic. She let go of our mother and scrambled to her feet, smoothing down her designer dress. If playing the victim was not going to work, she was going to have to pivot to pure entitlement. And I knew exactly what she was going to do next. Jasmine stood up, smoothing her dress and looking around the room for someone to save her. But before she could open her mouth to demand more money from our parents, Reginald suddenly stood up from the velvet dining chair. The heavy paralysis of shock that had kept him glued to the seat suddenly evaporated. He straightened his tie and pulled his shoulders back. He was a man who had spent his entire life solving problems by throwing money at them and dominating the people around him. He simply could not accept a reality where he was the victim and I was the one holding all the power. His massive ego simply would not allow it. Reginald reached into the breast pocket of his tailored suit jacket and pulled out his thick leather-bound checkbook. He pulled a gold pen from his shirt pocket and clicked it open. The sharp metallic sound echoed in the quiet penthouse. He did not look at me. He completely ignored my existence and turned his attention directly to Kendrick. "Listen to me, Kendrick," Reginald said, his voice projecting with that familiar booming authority he used to control our household. "I do not care what kind of vicious lies Nia is trying to spin. I do not care what these manipulated documents say. You are my son-in-law. You are family. And we protect our family." "Dad, what are you doing?" Jamal asked, stepping forward with a look of absolute disbelief. "Did you not just see the financial audits? He stole your retirement. He forged your signature. You cannot give him more money." Reginald snapped his head toward Jamal, his eyes blazing with fury. "You stay out of this," Reginald barked. "You have never understood high-level finance. Kendrick made a bad investment, and he got caught in a temporary market dip. That happens in the real business world. I will not let Nia use a temporary cash flow problem to destroy Jasmine's marriage and drag our family name through the mud." Reginald turned back to Kendrick, who was still kneeling on the floor, looking up at my father like a drowning man looking at a life raft. Kendrick actually had the audacity to wipe a fake tear from his eye and nod gratefully. "I am going to write you a check right now, Kendrick," Reginald declared proudly, holding his gold pen over the paper. "I am going to write you a check to cover the immediate margin calls and get the federal regulators off your back. First thing tomorrow morning, I will call my broker. I will liquidate the summer house in the Hamptons. I will cash out my remaining stock portfolios and I will empty my life insurance policies. We will cover this deficit entirely. We will save your firm, and we will save the family name." Brenda let out a massive sigh of relief from the floor. She actually smiled. "Oh, Reginald, thank God," Brenda whispered, clasping her hands together. "We can fix this. We can put this whole terrible morning behind us. Jasmine, sweetie, everything is going to be all right. Dad is going to fix it." Jasmine let out a breath she had been holding and nodded, her posture immediately returning to that of an entitled princess who knew her father would always clean up her messes. She even shot me a smug, triumphant glare. She really thought Reginald's checkbook was going to magically erase her husband's federal crimes. I stood completely still watching this pathetic display of absolute denial. It was like watching a group of people on a sinking ship arguing over who got to rearrange the deck chairs. Reginald was willing to strip himself of every last penny he owned to protect the golden child's husband, simply because he could not stomach the idea of me being right. I walked slowly around the kitchen island, closing the distance between me and my father. My expression was completely blank. I felt absolutely no sympathy for the man holding that gold pen. "Put the checkbook away, Dad," I said quietly. My voice was not angry. It was just incredibly tired. Reginald ignored me. He started writing on the first line of the check. "I said I am handling this, Nia," he muttered aggressively without looking up. "You can take your little tablet and your fabricated documents and get out of our family business. I am buying Kendrick's debt out right now." I reached out and grabbed his wrist. My grip was firm and unyielding, stopping the gold pen right on the paper. Reginald finally looked up at me, his eyes flashing with indignation at my physical defiance. "You cannot, Dad," I said, looking at him with dead, unsympathetic eyes. "You literally cannot buy his debt out." Reginald tried to pull his wrist away, but I held firmly. "Let go of me," he demanded. "I have over $2 million in liquid assets between the summer house and the stock portfolios. That is more than enough to cover a few bad margin calls." I let go of his wrist and took a step back, crossing my arms over my chest. "You are not listening to me," I said, speaking slowly and clearly, so every single syllable registered in his stubborn brain. "You still think this is a small mistake. You think he needs a few $100,000 to balance his books. But you did not read the final page of the audit I showed you. I pointed to the tablet sitting on the counter. The total deficit of Kendrick's firm is not $2 million, Dad, I continued. He did not just lose your retirement money, he lost the money of every single client he manages. He stole from doctors, lawyers, and local politicians. The absolute total amount of missing capital, the amount required to stop the firm from going into immediate federal receivership, is exactly $8 million. Reginald's jaw went slack. The gold pen slipped from his fingers and clattered onto the marble floor, rolling away into the foyer. 8 million, he repeated, his voice barely a whisper. The number was so massive it completely shattered his hero complex in an instant. Yes, $8 million, I confirmed, nodding slowly. And even if you magically had $8 million sitting in your checking account, writing a check to Kendrick right now would be completely useless. Why, Brenda asked, her voice trembling again. If we give him the money, he can pay the company back. Because Kendrick does not own his firm anymore. Mom, I explained, turning to look at her. The parent conglomerate seized all of his assets 3 days ago when the audit flagged the massive fraud. And last night at exactly midnight, I legally acquired that parent conglomerate. I bought the entire corporate structure. I turned my eyes back to Reginald, watching the last remaining shred of his pride disintegrate. You cannot write a check to Kendrick to save him, Dad, I said, delivering the final undisputed truth. Because Kendrick does not hold the debt. The conglomerate holds the debt. And I own the conglomerate. The person Kendrick owes $8 million to is me. The silence that followed was absolute. It was the heavy, suffocating silence of total defeat. Reginald looked down at the blank check in his hand. The reality of the situation finally penetrated his thick armor of denial. He could not throw money at this problem. He could not intimidate his way out of this room. He was completely powerless. I am the sole creditor. I continued, my voice echoing off the glass walls. I hold the deed to your remortgaged retirement house. I hold the massive debt that Kendrick created. I am the one who decides if this firm gets liquidated, and I am the one who decides if Kendrick goes to federal prison. You banned me from your New Year's Eve table because you thought I was a poor embarrassment. But right now, I am the only thing standing between your perfect family and absolute financial annihilation. Reginald slowly sank back into the velvet chair. The checkbook fell from his hand and landed on the floor next to his pen. He looked at me not as his disappointing daughter, but as an untouchable force that had completely outplayed him. He had spent my entire life making sure I knew my place at the absolute bottom of our family hierarchy. And in a single night, I had rewritten the entire structure and placed myself at the very top. Jasmine realized that her father could not save her. She realized that the $2 million he had promised was entirely useless against an $8 million mountain of fraudulent debt. She spun around and looked at her husband with pure venom in her eyes. The united front of the golden couple instantly turned into a desperate war for survival. Jasmine stared at her husband for a long moment. She looked at his wrinkled suit, his sweating forehead, and his shaking hands. The man she had paraded around for years as the ultimate symbol of her superiority had suddenly become completely useless to her. He was no longer a wealth manager, he was a massive liability. Jasmine took a physical step away from him, as if his financial ruin was a contagious disease. She slowly turned her head to look at me. The transformation was absolutely chilling to witness. The helpless weeping victim act vanished in a fraction of a second. The fake tears instantly dried up. Her shoulders stopped shaking, and her posture went completely rigid. Her face twisted into a vicious, ugly snarl that completely distorted her beautiful features. The mask had completely slipped, and the real Jasmine was finally standing in the open. You are going to forgive that debt right now, Nia, Jasmine demanded. Her voice was no longer trembling. It was sharp, demanding, and completely devoid of any remorse. You have $1 billion. $8 million is absolutely nothing to you. It is a rounding error in your new bank account. You are going to sign a piece of paper right now and wipe Kendrick's slate clean. You owe this to us. I looked at her completely unfazed by her sudden burst of aggressive entitlement. I owe you absolutely nothing, Jasmine, I replied calmly. And $8 million is not a rounding error when it consists of stolen funds. You want me to wave a magic wand and erase the fact that your husband stole the roof over our parents' heads. That is not going to happen. Jasmine took a step toward me, her hands clenched into tight fists at her sides. Yes, it is going to happen, she screamed, her voice echoing off the glass walls of the penthouse. Because you owe this family. I am the one who gave mom and dad grandchildren. I am the one who spent the last 10 years hosting the perfect holiday parties and maintaining the perfect image for this family while you were hiding in your cheap apartment playing on your computer. I played the role of the perfect daughter. I earned that money. I deserve that inheritance, not you. The sheer audacity of her words hung heavily in the air. She actually believed that producing grandchildren and taking nice family photos entitled her to drain our parents' retirement accounts. You deserve the inheritance, I asked, narrowing my eyes. Jasmine, there is no inheritance left. Your husband gambled it all away on terrible trades. He would not have had to make those high-risk trades if mom and dad had just given us the money directly. Jasmine snapped back her rage, completely blinding her to the reality of what she was saying. We needed that money, Naya. Do you have any idea how much it costs to keep up our lifestyle? The country club, the private schools, the luxury cars? We could not just downgrade our life. People would have asked questions. I refused to look like a failure in front of my friends. She was breathing heavily, her face flushed red with anger. So yes, I told him to take it, she shouted, pointing a furious finger at Kendrick. When he told me his firm was in trouble 2 years ago, I told him to use the house as collateral. It was my inheritance anyway. Mom and Dad were going to leave it to me when they died. I just took it a little early to save my family. You cannot punish me for doing what I had to do to survive. The entire penthouse went dead silent. The confession had ripped right out of her throat, driven by pure narcissistic rage. She was so incredibly desperate to justify her lavish lifestyle and defend her entitlement that she completely forgot who was sitting in the room with us. She had just admitted to orchestrating the theft of our parents' life savings. A low, agonizing sound broke the silence. It came from Brenda. Our mother was still sitting on the velvet sofa, her hands covering her mouth, her eyes wide with absolute horror. You knew, Brenda whispered, her voice trembling so badly she could barely get the words out. Jasmine, you knew he was taking our money. You told him to do it. Jasmine whipped her head around, realizing her fatal mistake. She looked at Brenda, and for a brief second, a flash of panic crossed her face. But instead of apologizing or crying, she doubled down. The golden child was entirely incapable of accepting responsibility for her actions. Oh, stop looking at me like that, Mom, Jasmine snapped, rolling her eyes in absolute disgust. Do not sit there and play the innocent victim. You raised me to be this way. You spent my entire childhood telling me that image was everything. You told me I had to marry a rich man to be successful. You told me I was better than everyone else. What was I supposed to do when Kendrick's business started failing? Was I supposed to admit I was broke? You would have been the first person to judge me. Brenda let out a sharp gasp, clutching her chest, as if she had just been physically struck. Reginald, who had been sitting in stunned silence, finally found his voice. We gave you everything, Jasmine, Reginald said, his voice thick with heartbreak and disbelief. We paid for your wedding. We paid for your vacations. We worshipped you, and you stole the house right out from under us to buy designer clothes and pretend you were rich. It was my money, Jasmine screamed back, completely losing her mind. It was going to be mine anyway. You always said I was your favorite. You always said I carried the family legacy. So I used the legacy, and now Nia is going to fix it because she has $1 billion, and it is her job to protect this family. I stood completely still, watching the golden child self-destruct in real time. For 35 years I had been the scapegoat, I had been the one blamed for every minor inconvenience in our family. I had been told I was selfish, ungrateful, and entirely unworthy of their love. And now the perfect daughter, the one they had sacrificed my college fund for, the one they had banned me from New Year's Eve to protect, was standing in my living room screaming that she had the absolute right to rob them blind. Jamal stepped forward, shaking his head in total disgust. "You are a sociopath, Jasmine," he said, his voice laced with pure contempt. "You literally do not care about anyone but yourself. You were going to let mom and dad get evicted from their own home and move into a trailer while you fled the country." "I did what I had to do," Jasmine hissed, glaring at Jamal. "And you should keep your mouth shut, Jamal. You are just as pathetic as Nia. You never contributed anything to this family either." I looked at Jasmine and felt absolutely nothing. No anger, no sadness, no sibling rivalry, just a deep, profound sense of finality. The war was officially over, the mask was gone, and there was nothing left to protect. She had completely isolated herself from the only people on earth who had ever truly loved her. "You are right about one thing, Jasmine," I said, my voice dropping to a low, steady calm that commanded the attention of everyone in the room. "I do have $1 billion, and $8 million is a very small fraction of my net worth. I could pay off Kendrick's fraudulent debt right now with a single phone call. I could clear his name, save your house, and fund your fake luxury lifestyle for the next 20 years without even making a dent in my bank accounts." Jasmine stopped breathing. Her eyes widened with a sudden, desperate glimmer of hope. She actually thought her screaming tantrum had worked. She thought I was going to cave to family pressure just like Reginald always did. "But I am not going to give you a single dime." I continued, watching the hope instantly shatter behind her eyes. "You stole their future to buy yourself a crown, Jasmine, and now you get to wear it in a federal courtroom. I am not your savior. I am the consequence you thought you would never have to face." Jasmine let out a primal scream of frustration. She actually lunged forward, her manicured hands curled into claws aiming directly for my face. She had completely lost her mind, driven mad by the sudden loss of her endless bank account. But before she could even cross the marble distance between us, a hand shot out and grabbed her aggressively by the shoulder. It was Jamal. He yanked her backward so hard she nearly tripped over her own designer heels. Jamal stepped firmly between us, using his broad shoulders to form an impenetrable wall. He had been standing quietly by the private elevator for the entire morning, watching this horrific family dynamic unfold. Jamal was always the peacemaker. He was the one who swallowed his pride and took the emotional abuse just to keep the peace at Thanksgiving dinners. He never raised his voice. He never fought back. But today, the dam had finally burst. "Do not even think about touching her." Jamal growled, his voice vibrating with a dark, heavy anger I had never heard from him before. "Get out of my way!" Jasmine shrieked, trying to push past him. "This has absolutely nothing to do with you. You are just a loser who drives a delivery truck. This is between me and Nia." Jamal let out a harsh, bitter laugh that sounded entirely devoid of any humor. "It has nothing to do with me," he repeated, shaking his head in sheer disbelief. "You are standing in Nia's house screaming that you deserve her money because you are the perfect daughter. You literally just admitted to stealing mom and dad's retirement house to fund your fake lifestyle. And you have the absolute nerve to call me a loser." Jasmine glared at him, her chest heaving. "You are a loser, Jamal. You never amounted to anything. Kendrick is 10 times the man you are." Kendrick flinched in the background, desperately wishing his wife would just stop talking. 10 times the man, Jamal repeated, his voice rising in volume until it filled the entire penthouse. "Is that why he had to steal my identity to buy your first-class plane tickets to Dubai, Jasmine?" The words hung in the air like a physical blow. Reginald, who had been staring blankly at the floor, suddenly snapped his head up. Brenda stopped her quiet sobbing and looked at Jamal with wide, bloodshot eyes. Even I was momentarily taken aback. I knew Kendrick was running a massive Ponzi scheme, but I had not looked deep enough into his personal credit lines to uncover this specific betrayal. "What are you talking about?" Reginald asked, his voice trembling with a new wave of absolute dread. Jamal reached into the inner pocket of his jacket. He pulled out a thick folded stack of paper and aggressively threw it directly at Kendrick's chest. The papers hit the disgraced wealth manager and fluttered down to the marble floor, scattering everywhere. They were official bank statements and collection notices. "Tell them," Kendrick Jamal shouted, pointing a furious finger at his brother-in-law. "Tell them how you got the capital to fund Jasmine's shopping sprees when your firm first started bleeding cash. Tell them what you did with my social security number." Kendrick stared at the papers on the floor, looking like he was going to vomit again. He could not form a single word. Jamal turned to look at our parents, his eyes filled with years of unacknowledged pain. 3 years ago, Jamal said, his voice shaking with raw emotion, "Jasmine asked me to house sit for them while they went to the Bahamas. I needed the extra money, so I agreed. I stayed in their massive house for a week. I did not know that while I was there, Kendrick went into his home office safe and took a copy of my birth certificate and my social security card from a file Mom had given them for safekeeping years ago." Brenda let out a small, horrified gasp. She had trusted Jasmine with all of our sensitive family documents. "They opened 5 massive lines of credit in my name," Jamal continued, tears of pure frustration forming in his eyes. "They applied for premium platinum credit cards using my identity, but routing the statements to a secure digital mailbox I did not even know existed. They maxed out every single card within 6 months. They bought designer clothes, imported watches, and those luxury trips to Dubai that Mom was always so proud to brag about to the neighbors. They spent over $80,000 in my name, and then they completely stopped making the minimum payments." Jasmine crossed her arms, looking away and entirely refusing to make eye contact with her brother. "You were not even using your credit, Jamal," she muttered defensively. "You live in a cheap apartment. You do not even travel." Jamal lunged forward, but I put my hand on his back to steady him. He stopped, but the rage radiating from him was palpable. "I was not using it because I was trying to save money to start my own logistics business," Jamal screamed, his face red with fury. "I went to the bank last year to apply for a small business loan. I had a solid business plan. I had saved up $20,000 of my own money. And the loan officer looked at me like I was a criminal. He told me my credit score was in the low 400s. He told me I had massive accounts in severe delinquency and multiple collection agencies hunting me down." Jamal looked at our father, the man who always preached about hard work and financial responsibility. "Do you know what it feels like, Dad?" Jamal asked, his voice breaking. "To sit in a bank and find out your own sister financially ruined you. I could not get the loan. I could not even get a new apartment when my lease was up. I had to move into a terrible neighborhood and take a second job driving a truck just to survive. And the entire time I was doing that, I had to sit at the Thanksgiving table and listen to you praise Jasmine for being so incredibly successful." "Why didn't you tell us?" Reginald whispered, his face buried in his trembling hands. "Why didn't you say anything?" "Because I confronted them," Jamal replied, pointing at the golden couple. "I went to Kendrick's office and confronted him. And you know what he did? He threatened me. He told me that if I went to the police and filed an identity theft report, he would tell you and Mom that I was the one who stole the money. He said he would use his expensive lawyers to crush me and that you would always believe him over me." And he was right, Dad. You would have believed him. You always chose them. The absolute truth of Jamal's words echoed in the penthouse. Reginald knew it was true. Brenda knew it was true. They had spent decades actively ignoring my achievements and Jamal's struggles just to maintain the flawless illusion of Jasmine's superiority. They had created the exact monster that was now actively destroying them. "Kendrick is not just facing federal charges for corporate fraud," Jamal said, looking down at his brother-in-law with total disgust. "I filed the police report for identity theft 3 days ago. The detectives are already building the case. You are going to prison, Kendrick. And Jasmine, since your signature is on the luxury purchases, you are going right down with him." Jasmine let out a piercing shriek of pure panic. She grabbed Kendrick's arm, digging her nails into his suit jacket. "Tell him to drop it," she demanded, shaking her husband. Tell him to take the report back, Kendrick. Do something. But Kendrick was completely paralyzed. He was trapped in a nightmare of his own making, and there was no amount of arrogant smooth talking that could save him now. The family fracture was complete. There was no going back from this moment. The living room was entirely divided. Jamal and I stood on one side, representing the children who had been cast aside and emotionally starved. On the other side stood the golden child and her fraudulent husband, exposed as absolute parasites. And caught in the middle were Reginald and Brenda, two parents who were currently choking on the bitter reality of their own toxic parenting. Brenda was rocking back and forth on the velvet sofa, completely catatonic with grief. Her perfect family was gone. Her retirement was gone. Her favorite daughter was facing criminal charges. But Reginald could not accept defeat. His authoritarian brain was short-circuiting. He had lost his house, he had lost his money, and he had lost his authority. The sheer embarrassment of his colossal failure was eating him alive. He needed a scapegoat. He needed someone to blame for this massive destruction because he absolutely refused to look in the mirror. And since he could not control Jamal and he could no longer afford to protect Jasmine, he turned his desperate toxic anger entirely back on me. Reginald stepped straight over the scattered collection notices on the marble floor as if they did not even exist. He was completely incapable of processing the reality of his golden child committing identity theft against his own son. His brain simply refused to accept the sheer magnitude of the betrayal. Instead of holding Jasmine and Kendrick accountable for ruining Jamal's life, he took the easiest route available to his shattered ego. He directed all of his boiling toxic rage directly at me. He marched across the kitchen, closing the distance between us, until he was standing only inches away from my face. He puffed out his chest, trying to use his physical presence to force me into submission. His face was flushed a dangerous dark red, and the veins in his neck were visibly pulsing. He pointed a rigid, shaking finger right between my eyes. "This is all your fault," Reginald spat, his voice dripping with pure, unadulterated venom. "You brought this disaster into my family. If you had just stayed in your lane and minded your own business, none of this would be happening. You bought that conglomerate purely out of spite. You hacked into those files because you wanted to humiliate your sister." I stared at him in absolute disbelief. The level of his delusion was truly breathtaking. "I did not force Kendrick to run a Ponzi scheme, Dad," I said, my voice perfectly level. "I did not force him to remortgage your house, and I certainly did not force Jasmine to steal Jamal's identity. They did that all on their own. I just turned on the light so you could see the cockroaches." "Shut up," Reginald roared, slamming his hand down flat against the marble island. The loud crack echoed through the penthouse, making Brenda flinch violently on the sofa. "You do not get to speak to me with disrespect. I am your father. I am the head of this family. And I am telling you right now that you are going to fix the massive mess you just created." He leaned in closer, his breath hot and ragged. "You have $1 billion sitting in the bank. You have the ultimate authority over this parent company. You are going to walk over to your secure laptop right now. You are going to draft a legally binding corporate document forgiving the entire $8 million debt that Kendrick's firm owes. You are going to wipe the slate entirely clean. You are going to release the deed to my house, and you are going to pay off the credit cards they opened in Jamal's name." Reginald pointed his finger toward the floor, where Kendrick was still kneeling. "You are going to save your sister's husband from going to federal prison, and you are going to do it right this second." I looked at my father, feeling a profound sense of emptiness. He was not asking me to help because he loved me. He was demanding that I use my hard-earned empire to shield his favorite daughter from the legal consequences of her own horrific actions. He wanted me to sweep millions of dollars of fraud under the rug just so he could go back to pretending his life was absolutely perfect. "And if I refuse, Dad?" I asked, tilting my head slightly. "What exactly happens if I do not open my laptop and sign away my money to save the people who just robbed you blind?" Reginald narrowed his eyes. He pulled his shoulders back, preparing to deploy the ultimate psychological weapon he had kept in his arsenal for my entire life. He thought he knew exactly what made me tick. He thought I was still that desperate, lonely little girl who used to bring home straight A report cards, hoping for just a fraction of the praise he effortlessly showered on Jasmine. He thought I was terrified of being abandoned. "If you do not clear your sister's debt right now," Reginald said, his voice dropping into a cold, mechanical, absolute tone, "you are no longer my daughter." The words hung in the air, heavy and toxic. Jasmine, who had been standing frozen in fear, suddenly perked up. A cruel, hopeful smirk crept back onto her face. She actually thought Reginald had just played the winning card. Brenda stopped crying and looked at me, waiting for me to break down and surrender to the patriarch's ultimate threat. "If you walk away from this family today," Reginald continued, twisting the knife deeper, "you will be completely dead to us. We will legally disown you. You will never be invited to another holiday. You will not be welcome at our funerals. You will be entirely cut off from the family legacy. You will spend the rest of your life alone in this massive empty apartment with your money and absolutely no one to love you. You will have nothing, Nia. Choose right now. Your pride or your family." He stood there glaring at me, entirely convinced he had just won the war. He expected my eyes to well up with tears. He expected my lower lip to tremble. He expected me to fall to pieces, apologize for my defiance, and frantically open my laptop to buy back his conditional love. For 35 years, the threat of his rejection had been the invisible chain around my neck. It was the reason I let them mock my clothes, the reason I let them exclude me from family dinners, and the reason I never fought back when they prioritized Jasmine's happiness over my basic needs. The fear of being unloved by my own parents had kept me paralyzed in the role of the obedient, silent scapegoat. But as I stood there looking at Reginald, I realized something incredibly liberating. The chain was not made of iron. It was made of absolutely nothing. The love he was threatening to take away from me did not actually exist. He did not love me. He loved the control he had over me. He loved having a punching bag. He loved having someone he could constantly compare Jasmine to so she would look better by default. And now he only wanted me because I possessed the exact amount of capital required to bail his golden child out of federal prison. His love was not a warm blanket. It was a currency that he only intended to spend when he needed to buy my absolute compliance. And looking at the broken, pathetic man standing in my multi-million-dollar kitchen, I realized I was entirely too rich to ever accept his counterfeit currency again. I did not cry. I did not panic. I did not drop to my knees and beg for my place in the family. Instead, a slow, genuine smile spread across my face. It was a smile of pure, untethered freedom. Reginald's confident glare faltered. He blinked, clearly confused by my reaction. This was not the script he had written in his head. "You think you are threatening me, Dad?" I said, my voice incredibly soft, but carrying the weight of a judge delivering a final sentence. "You think telling me that I will never have to attend another one of your toxic holidays is a punishment? You think banning me from the family name is going to break my heart?" I took a deliberate step toward him, forcing him to be the one to back away. "You already banned me from New Year's Eve last night," I reminded him, watching his eyes dart nervously. "Mom left a voicemail telling me I was too poor and too embarrassing to sit at Kendrick's table. You already cut me out. You only want me back right now because you realized I own the table. Nia." Reginald stammered, trying to regain his dominant footing. "Do not play games with me. I am giving you one last chance to save your place in this family." "I do not want a place in this family," I replied, my voice ringing with absolute finality. "I spent my entire life starving for your approval, and I finally realized that your plate is completely empty. You have absolutely nothing to offer me, Dad. You are broke financially, and you are entirely bankrupt morally." Jasmine let out an outraged gasp. "You cannot talk to him like that," she shrieked, pointing at me. I completely ignored her, keeping my eyes locked on the man who had just tried to emotionally destroy me. "You gave me an ultimatum, Dad," I said, nodding my head slowly. "And I happily accept your terms. I will not forgive a single cent of Kendrick's debt. I will not release the deed to your house. and I will absolutely accept your offer of disownment. Reginald stood completely paralyzed. The ultimate weapon had failed. He had fired his biggest gun and the bullet had simply bounced off my chest. He had absolutely no leverage left. But before we make this disownment official, I continued turning my back on him and walking toward the center of the massive living room. Before I kick you out of my home and out of my life forever, there is one last thing you need to hear. You need to understand exactly who you just sacrificed your life savings to protect. He thought the threat of being unloved would break me. He had absolutely no idea that his pathetic ultimatum was the exact match I needed to burn their entire fabricated world straight to the ground. I looked at Reginald and let his harsh words hang heavily in the air. He had just officially disowned me. He had fired his absolute best weapon directly at my chest. And I felt nothing but an overwhelming sense of profound peace. I did not fall to my knees on the marble floor. I did not beg for his forgiveness or promise to fix his financial nightmare. I simply turned my back on him. The sheer disrespect of turning my back on the arrogant patriarch of our family was something that would have gotten me severely punished a decade ago. Today, it just left him standing there with his mouth open, completely paralyzed by his own sudden irrelevance. I walked slowly across the imported marble floors. The soft, steady click of my heels was the only sound in the massive penthouse. I headed directly for the sleek black smart home control panel mounted on the wall near the floor-to-ceiling windows. I could feel all of their panicked eyes burning into my back. They were completely confused by my total lack of emotion. Reginald had just told me I was entirely dead to the family, and instead of reacting to my own emotional execution, I was playing with the lighting controls. I reached the panel and tapped the glass screen. The interface lit up instantly under my fingertips. I slid my finger down the digital brightness scale. Instantly, the bright morning sunlight filtering through the motorized blinds was softened as the sheer charcoal shades automatically lowered themselves over the massive windows. The overhead crystal chandelier dimmed to a low ambient glow. The sudden shift in lighting completely changed the atmosphere of the entire room. It went from a bright morning family confrontation to a dark and suffocating interrogation room. I was setting the perfect stage for the final act of their absolute destruction. Jasmine shifted uncomfortably on her designer heels. "What are you doing, Nia?" she demanded, her voice tight with newly formed anxiety. "Turn the lights back on right now. Stop trying to be dramatic and just sign the debt forgiveness papers like Dad told you to." She was still aggressively clinging to the desperate hope that my silence meant I was going to obey our father. The golden child truly believed that if she just kept giving loud orders, the universe would eventually bend right back to her will, just like it always did. I did not answer her. I reached into my silk robe and pulled my smartphone out of my pocket. I swiped open the screen and went straight to my audio settings. I tapped the secure wireless network labeled Penthouse Main Audio. A soft, deep chime echoed from the invisible speakers embedded in the high ceilings, confirming the connection. The audio system was state-of-the-art, designed to fill every single square inch of the two-story apartment with crystal-clear studio-quality sound. "Look at me when I am talking to you," Reginald barked, trying one last time to reclaim his lost authority. "You are not in charge here, Nia. You are going to do exactly what I said, or you will never see any of us ever again. You will be completely alone." I turned around slowly. I leaned my shoulder casually against the wall, holding my phone loosely in my hand. I looked at the 5 people standing in my foyer. It looked exactly like a tragic painting of a completely ruined dynasty. Kendrick was still on the floor, looking absolutely sick to his stomach, sweating through his expensive tailored suit. Brenda was weeping openly onto the velvet cushions, mourning the sudden, violent death of her perfect social image. Jasmine was standing with her arms crossed, pretending to be brave, while her hands literally shook with fear. Jamal stood tall off to the side, watching me with a look of pure respect and validation. And Reginald stood in the very center, a hollow shell of a man who had traded his soul and his life savings for a fake country club reputation. The silence in the room became completely deafening. It was a heavy, thick silence that physically pressed down on their chests. I let them sit in it. I let them marinate in the absolute terror of the unknown. They had no idea what I was doing, but they could sense that the ground beneath them was about to give way completely. For 35 years, they had controlled the narrative. They had written the script where I was the pathetic loser, and Jasmine was the untouchable queen. But I had just bought the entire theater, and I was about to play my own script loudly. "You really thought I was going to cry, Dad?" I asked, my voice cutting through the heavy dark silence like a perfectly sharpened blade. "You thought the idea of never seeing you again would terrify me into giving you my money. But the truth is, I have been mourning the loss of a father my entire life. I grieved for you years ago when I realized you would always love Jasmine's lies significantly more than you loved my truth. You cannot threaten to take away a love that you never actually gave me in the first place." Reginald swallowed hard. The absolute freezing certainty in my voice terrified him to his core. He took a small, shaky step backward, his tough, authoritarian exterior finally cracking under the massive weight of his colossal failure. He realized in that exact moment that he had completely lost me forever. There was no more psychological manipulation. There was no more parental guilt tripping. The emotional well he had selfishly drawn from for decades was completely bone dry. "And as for you, Jasmine," I said, shifting my cold gaze directly to the golden child, "you have spent your entire life believing that you are the smartest, most important person in every single room you walk into. You thought you could steal millions of dollars, forge federal banking documents, and completely ruin our brother's life without ever facing a single consequence. You thought you were completely untouchable because Mom and Dad would always blindly clean up your massive messes." I lifted my phone, tapping the screen to open my secure audio files folder. "But Mom and Dad cannot clean this up, Jasmine." I continued, my thumb hovering directly over the play button. "Because Mom and Dad are broke. They do not even own the shoes they are wearing right now. You stripped them of every single financial resource they had. So now you have to face the real world. And the real world does not care that you have blonde hair or a nice fake smile. The real world only cares about hard evidence." Kendrick let out a low, pathetic whimper from the floor. He knew exactly what was coming. He knew that a billionaire tech founder did not just dim the lights and connect to a surround sound system to give a motivational family speech. He knew I had the ultimate receipts. He just did not know how utterly devastating those receipts were going to be to his fragile wife. I looked down at my phone screen. I had a specific digital folder labeled Country Club Gala. Inside that folder was the exact moment Jasmine and Kendrick had gleefully sealed their own fate. I looked back up at my family one last time, giving them 3 final seconds of silence before their entire fabricated reality was shattered permanently. I pressed the small triangle in the center of my screen. The surround sound system roared to life. Because the executive who recorded it was using highly advanced corporate espionage software on his phone, the audio was not muffled or grainy. It was broadcasted in terrifying high definition. The first sound that filled my darkened living room was the unmistakable clinking of crystal champagne flutes, followed by the soft, upbeat tempo of a live jazz band playing in the background. It was the exact ambiance of the exclusive country club gala they had proudly banned me from attending just a few hours earlier. Then Kendrick's smooth, arrogant voice echoed from the ceiling. He sounded incredibly relaxed, completely unbothered by the fact that he was actively defrauding half the city. "I am telling you, baby, the old man is completely clueless," Kendrick's recorded voice said. "I showed him a fabricated quarterly spreadsheet this afternoon, and he literally patted me on the back. He did not even look at the collateral line." I kept my eyes locked on Reginald. His jaw clamped shut so tightly I thought his teeth were going to shatter. The authoritarian patriarch was being mocked by the son-in-law he had worshipped. Then Jasmine let out a loud, carefree laugh that bounced off my glass walls. "Of course he did not look at the collateral," Kendrick, Jasmine's voice replied, dripping with absolute disdain. My father only cares about looking like a big shot in front of his golf buddies. As long as you keep wearing those expensive suits and buying the expensive wine, he will sign whatever you put in front of him." Brenda let out a small suffocated whimper from the sofa. Hearing her favorite daughter mock her husband with such callous disregard was like watching her take a physical blow to the stomach. But the recording was not even close to being finished. "We just need one more massive injection of liquid cash to hold off the federal auditors until the end of January," Kendrick's voice continued over the sound of the jazz band. "If Reginald signs over the final equity in his remaining stock portfolios next week, we will have enough time to route the capital into the offshore accounts. Just tell him it is a temporary bridge loan for a massive real estate development," Jasmine instructed smoothly. "He loves feeling like an insider." "And what about my mother? Did you make sure her name is completely off the protected trust?" "I handled Brenda months ago," Kendrick boasted, taking a sip of his drink. "She signed the revised power of attorney documents without even reading the second page because I told her it was just standard tax optimization. She is completely legally exposed." The sheer level of predatory calculation was staggering. Kendrick and Jasmine were not just panicking and making bad choices under pressure. They had systematically and intentionally dismantled my parents' financial security with absolute malicious intent. They treated my parents like disposable assets to be drained and discarded. I looked at Jasmine. She was standing in the center of the foyer, her hands clamped tightly over her ears, desperately trying to block out the sound of her own recorded voice. But the state-of-the-art audio system was entirely relentless. The crystal-clear sound surrounded her from every single angle, forcing her to listen to her own betrayal. Then came the final, devastating blow. The part of the recording that I knew would completely permanently destroy whatever fractured remnants of the family dynamic were still clinging to life. "So we execute the transfers next Thursday," Kendrick said, lowering his voice slightly. "The firm goes into forced bankruptcy by the second week of February. The banks will immediately seize the retirement house and everything attached to Reginald's name. We take the offshore funds and catch the private charter to Dubai. We will be entirely untouchable." There was a brief pause on the recording, just the sound of Jasmine taking a long, slow sip of her cocktail. Perfect Jasmine's voice finally replied, "Dubai is going to be incredible this time of year. I already looked at some luxury villas near the water." "And what about your parents?" Jasmine, Kendrick asked, his tone completely detached. "When the bank evicts them, they are going to have absolutely nothing left, not a single dime." Jasmine laughed again. It was a cold, heartless sound that made the hair on my arms stand up. "I do not care, Kendrick," she said casually. "They can go live in a trailer for all I care. They gave me everything I wanted my whole life, so this is just their final contribution to my happiness. Plus, we will be in Dubai. It will not be our problem anymore." I reached out and tapped the screen, stopping the recording. The audio cut out instantly, leaving behind a ringing dead silence in my massive living room. The jazz music, the clinking glasses, the cold, calculated laughter. It all vanished, leaving nothing but the brutal, undeniable truth suspended in the heavy air. I did not say a single word. I did not need to. The golden child had just acted as her own executioner and her own judge. She had delivered the final guilty verdict straight from her own mouth. I simply stood by the smart home panel, holding my phone, and watched the absolute destruction of my abusers unfold right in front of me. Reginald was a man who worshipped his public image above all else. He had spent his entire adult life making sure his neighbors knew exactly how much his cars cost and how exclusive his country club memberships were. Hearing his beloved daughter casually condemn him to live in a trailer was a psychological blow so severe that his brain could barely process the trauma. He looked down at his expensive leather shoes and then slowly raised his head to look at Jasmine. His eyes were entirely hollow, stripped of every ounce of pride he had ever possessed. Brenda was in a state of absolute catatonia. The woman who had rushed to shield Jasmine from my truth just minutes earlier was now curled into a tight ball on my velvet sofa. She was weeping so hard she was physically choking on her own tears. She had signed away her own power of attorney because Kendrick told her it was a tax optimization strategy. She had handed the weapon directly to the people who were eagerly plotting to slaughter her financially. Jamal stepped away from the wall. He walked slowly around the scattered collection notices on the floor until he was standing right in front of Jasmine. She finally dropped her hands from her ears, looking up at him with wild, terrified eyes. "You are evil," Jamal said, his voice barely above a whisper but carrying a weight that shook the entire room. "You are not just spoiled, Jasmine. You are truly evil. You sat at their dinner table for years acting like the perfect loving daughter while you actively plotted to leave them homeless on the street. You stole my future and you threw their entire lives in the garbage just so you could sit in a villa by the water." Jasmine tried to speak. She opened her mouth but no sound came out. She looked at Kendrick desperately, hoping he would jump up and defend her, but Kendrick was entirely broken. He was still sitting on the floor staring blankly at the marble tiles, fully realizing that his grand escape plan was now permanently cancelled. I stood watching the fallout with absolute emotional detachment. The little girl inside me who had once craved their love was completely gone. In her place stood a woman who had built an empire in the shadows while they were busy destroying each other in the light. Reginald did not scream. He did not yell or try to command the room like he had done for my entire existence. The patriarch who had spent his life dominating every space he walked into was suddenly reduced to absolute devastating silence. He staggered backward, his expensive leather shoes scraping awkwardly against the imported marble floor. His knees buckled completely, giving out beneath the crushing weight of his colossal failure. He collapsed heavily into one of my velvet dining chairs. The deep, rich color entirely drained from his face, leaving him looking pale, fragile, and incredibly old. He stared blankly at the floor. The perfect family legacy he had sacrificed my childhood to build was nothing but a criminal conspiracy designed by the very daughter he worshipped. I watched his chest heave as he struggled to pull air into his lungs. He was grieving the sudden violent death of his massive ego. For 35 years, he believed he was the ultimate authority, the untouchable king of our family. But the high-definition recording had just exposed him as nothing more than a gullible mark. A foolish old man who had been easily manipulated by a cheap suit and a fake smile. He looked up at Jasmine, and the look in his eyes was one of pure, unfamiliar terror. He was looking at a complete stranger. Brenda reacted entirely differently. While Reginald imploded, our mother exploded. Her fragile mind completely rejected the reality of the audio recording. She simply could not accept that her golden child, the daughter she had aggressively protected at my expense for decades, was actively plotting to leave her homeless and destitute. Brenda let out a guttural, piercing scream that tore through the quiet penthouse. She scrambled to her feet, her face twisted in pure primal rage. She lunged across the foyer directly toward me. Her arm swung out wildly, her manicured hand aiming right for the smartphone I was holding. She wanted to physically destroy the evidence. She wanted to smash the phone into a million pieces so she could go back to living in her comfortable delusion. But she was slow and entirely uncoordinated by her own panic. I simply took one calm, deliberate step to the left. Brenda missed the phone completely. Her forward momentum carried her off balance, and her knees slammed hard onto the unforgiving marble floor. She did not try to get back up. She collapsed forward, pressing her forehead against the cold stone, sobbing hysterically. She pounded her fists against the floor, wailing like a wounded animal. "It was not Hernia," Brenda screamed through her violent tears. "Tell me you faked it. Tell me it is a fake recording. Jasmine would never do that to us. She loves us. She would never leave us in a trailer. Tell me it is a lie." I looked down at my mother writhing on the floor. I felt absolutely no pity. "You heard her own voice, Mom," I said, my tone perfectly flat and devoid of any sympathy. "You heard them planning your financial execution. You signed away your own power of attorney because you were too busy bragging about Kendrick at the country club to actually read the legal documents he put in front of you. You handed them the knife, and you actually thanked them for stabbing you in the back. Do not ask me to lie to you, just because the truth is finally too painful to swallow." I turned my attention back to the center of the room. Jasmine was completely frozen. The vicious, snarling woman who had tried to physically attack me just moments ago was entirely gone. She looked like a plastic mannequin. Her arms were rigid at her sides, and her eyes were wide with sheer, absolute panic. The mask had not just slipped, it had been completely incinerated. There was nowhere left for her to hide. The golden child was standing naked in the harsh, unforgiving light of her own sociopathic greed. She looked around the room, frantically searching for a single ally. She looked at Kendrick, but he was staring at the wall, completely broken and unresponsive. She looked at Reginald, but he turned his face away entirely, unable to look at the monster he had created. She looked at Jamal, but he just shook his head in absolute disgust. Finally, she looked at Brenda, sobbing on the floor. Jasmine took a tiny, hesitant step toward our mother. "Mom." Jasmine whispered, her voice shaking violently. "Mom, please. We were just joking. We had too much to drink at the gala. It was just a stupid joke. We were never actually going to leave you." I did not let her spin another toxic lie. I stepped forward, cutting off her path to Brenda. "Do not even try it, Jasmine," I commanded, my voice echoing with absolute authority. "Do not stand in my house and insult my intelligence. You were not joking. You had already researched luxury villas near the water. You had already maxed out Jamal's credit cards to fund your wardrobe. You had already forced Mom to sign over her legal protections. It was a calculated, premeditated plan to drain this family dry and run away. For my entire life, I had been told that Jasmine was the absolute standard of excellence. I was told to watch how she walked, how she talked, and how she effortlessly charmed people. I was told that if I just acted a little more like my sister, maybe I would not be such a massive disappointment to our parents. But looking at her now, shivering in her expensive designer dress, I saw exactly what she really was. She was a hollow, empty shell. She had absolutely no substance, no actual talent, and no moral compass. Her entire existence was funded by fraud and sustained by the blind worship of two parents who were too obsessed with their social status to see the truth. She had spent 35 years feeding off of us like a parasite, and now that the host was completely dead, she had absolutely no idea how to survive. Jasmine took a step backward, her chest heaving as she struggled to breathe. "You set me up," she accused, pointing a trembling manicured finger at me. "You sent someone to spy on us. You recorded us illegally." "That is a massive invasion of privacy, Nia. You cannot use that recording. I will sue you for everything you have." I actually laughed out loud. It was a short, sharp sound of pure, absolute disbelief. "You are going to sue me, Jasmine?" I asked, raising an eyebrow. "With what money?" "You do not even own the designer purse you are holding right now. It was bought with stolen funds. And as for my executive recording you in a crowded public country club where there is absolutely no legal expectation of privacy, I think you will find that the authorities are going to be very interested in hearing it. Especially the part where you proudly detail your exact timeline for fleeing the country to avoid a federal prosecution." The mention of federal prosecution completely broke whatever fragile remaining nerve she had left. Jasmine let out a loud, dramatic wail and collapsed to the floor right next to Kendrick. She curled into a tight ball, burying her face in her hands. The golden couple, the absolute pride and joy of my parents. The people who had actively banned me from celebrating the new year with my own family were now quite literally rolling on my marble floor in sheer pathetic terror. I looked at Jamal. He was standing tall, his shoulders completely relaxed for the first time in years. The heavy, agonizing burden of being the forgotten son, the one whose credit had been maliciously destroyed, was finally lifting. We exchanged a silent look of total validation. We had survived the toxic war zone of our childhood, and we were the only two people walking out of the wreckage entirely intact. I had absolutely no mercy left to give the people on the floor. The heavy, suffocating silence in the room was finally broken by the sound of expensive leather scraping against imported marble. Kendrick slowly pushed himself up from the floor. His custom-tailored Italian suit was completely ruined, soaked with nervous sweat and deeply wrinkled from rolling around in sheer panic. He did not look at my father, who was staring blankly at the wall. He did not look at my brother, who was watching him with absolute disgust. Kendrick looked down at his wife, who was still curled into a pathetic ball, weeping hysterically into her hands, and then he did something that completely shattered the last remaining illusion of their perfect golden marriage. He literally stepped right over her. He walked toward me, leaving Jasmine crying on the cold floor. His hands were raised in a placating, desperate gesture. The slick, arrogant wealth manager who had threatened to have me arrested for insider trading just 20 minutes ago was entirely gone. In his place stood a terrified, cornered animal who realized his survival depended entirely on the woman he had spent years mocking. "Listen to me, Nia," Kendrick said, his voice cracking with slimy desperation. "We can make a deal. We are both smart business people. We can figure this out without destroying everything." Jasmine stopped crying. She lowered her hands from her face and looked up at her husband, completely confused by his sudden change in tone. Kendrick completely ignored her and took another step toward the kitchen island. He leaned forward, his bloodshot eyes darting frantically. "It was all her fault, Nia," he whispered urgently, pointing a shaking finger back at his wife. Jasmine was the one who demanded the luxury lifestyle. She was the one who wanted the expensive cars and the country club memberships and the designer clothes. She drove me to do this. She threatened to leave me if I ever lost my status. I had to secure those fraudulent loans to keep up with her insane, endless expectations. Jasmine let out a horrific, piercing scream. "Kendrick, how can you say that?" she shrieked, scrambling to her knees and grabbing the bottom of his suit jacket. "You told me the business was fine. You told me we were rich." Kendrick violently kicked his leg free, shaking her off like a disgusting parasite. "Shut up, Jasmine," he barked, looking down at her with pure, unadulterated hatred. "You ruined my life. You and your parents demanding absolute perfection every single day. I had to steal just to survive in this toxic family." He immediately turned his attention back to me, his eyes wide and frantic. "I will leave her, Nia," he promised, nodding his head rapidly, as if he had just solved the entire problem. "I will sign the divorce papers this afternoon. I will completely cut her off. I will even testify against her for the identity theft against Jamal. I will give the police everything they need to lock her up for the credit card fraud. Just please let me keep my firm." The entire room started spinning for Reginald and Brenda. The horrific reality of their choices was crashing down on them in real time. The brilliant, successful man they had chosen over their own daughter was now eagerly volunteering to send their favorite child to prison just to save his own skin. Brenda clutched her chest, gasping for air, as she watched the golden couple tear each other apart like rabid dogs. Kendrick leaned his sweaty palms against my pristine marble counter. "You own the parent company now, Nia," he continued, his words spilling out in a desperate rush. "You need experienced brokers. I know the market. I have the client connections. If you quietly restructure my massive debt and let me keep operating my branch, I will make you billions. We can easily bury the bad trades in the corporate acquisition paperwork. I will be your top earner. Just do not dissolve my company. We do not need to involve the authorities." I looked at Kendrick. I looked at the absolute moral bankruptcy radiating from his sweating pores. I looked at a man who was willing to sell his wife to a federal prosecutor just to keep his corner office. I actually let out a laugh. It was not a loud or joyful laugh. It was a sharp, freezing sound that cut straight through his desperate, pathetic pitch. "You want to be my business partner?" I asked, tilting my head slightly. "You want to divorce my sister, testify against her in court, and work for my tech empire to pay off an $8 million deficit that you created by robbing my parents blind?" "Yes," Kendrick said, nodding eagerly, completely missing the heavy, lethal sarcasm in my voice. "I will do whatever it takes. Just name your terms, Nia. I am completely at your mercy." I stopped smiling. My face went completely stone cold. "I am not negotiating with you, Kendrick," I stated, my voice dropping to a heavy, absolute tone that made him flinch. "You seem to be under the massive delusion that I brought you up to my penthouse to have a corporate board meeting. I did not bring you here to restructure your debt. I did not bring you here to hire you. I brought you here to watch you realize that your life is completely over." Kendrick blinked, the false, desperate hope instantly draining from his eyes. "What do you mean?" he whispered, his voice trembling. I picked up my sleek tablet from the counter. "You keep asking me to keep this quiet, Kendrick," I said, tapping the smooth glass screen. "You keep offering me disgusting deals to prevent the authorities from finding out about your Ponzi scheme. But you fundamentally misunderstood the timeline of my morning." I took a slow, deliberate step toward him, forcing him to back away from my kitchen island. "When I legally acquired the parent conglomerate last night at exactly midnight, I automatically triggered a massive corporate fiduciary review. As the new majority shareholder, I am legally obligated by federal law to report any severe financial irregularities to the government immediately. If I hide your $8 million fraud, I become a criminal accessory to your massive federal crimes. And I am absolutely not risking my billion-dollar tech empire to save a pathetic thief who banned me from a country club." Kendrick stopped breathing. His mouth fell open, but absolutely no sound came out. "My corporate legal team arrived at their offices at exactly 6 o'clock this morning," I explained, watching the sheer absolute terror wash over his pale face. "They compiled every single forged document, every single fake margin call, and every single piece of evidence regarding your offshore accounts in Dubai. And at exactly 8 o'clock this morning, they handed the entire unredacted financial audit directly over to the Securities and Exchange Commission." Jasmine let out a suffocated gasp from the floor. Reginald buried his face in his hands, letting out a long, agonizing groan of total defeat. "They already have it, Kendrick," I said, delivering the final undisputed killing blow. "The SEC has everything. The federal investigators are probably walking into your pristine wealth management office right this very second. They are boxing up your files. They are freezing your bank accounts. They are seizing your servers, and they are confiscating your passport." Kendrick stumbled backward, clutching his chest exactly like my father had done earlier. He looked like he was having a genuine heart attack. His entire body began to violently shake as the walls of his fabricated reality completely collapsed around him. "There is no deal to be made," I continued, my voice ringing with total absolute finality. "There is no debt forgiveness. There is no quiet restructuring. You are not flying to a luxury villa in Dubai next month. You are going to federal prison. And because you just loudly confessed to wire fraud and identity theft on my high-definition surround sound audio system, I am going to make sure the federal prosecutors get a crystal-clear copy of that tape, too." The absolute finality of my words hit Kendrick like a physical blow to the chest. The terrifying reality of a federal investigation was no longer an abstract concept floating in the future. It was happening right now. At this very second, government agents were likely swarming his pristine downtown office, bagging up his hard drives and freezing his corporate accounts. The slick, arrogant wealth manager, who had spent the last decade acting like he was entirely untouchable, suddenly realized he was trapped in a cage of his own making. His fight-or-flight response kicked in instantly. Kendrick looked around my massive living room like a cornered rat desperately searching for a way out. He did not look at my parents who had trusted him with their lives. He did not look at his wife who was still sobbing hysterically on the floor. He only cared about saving himself. He scrambled to his feet, his expensive custom-tailored Italian shoes slipping slightly on the polished marble. He let out a breathless, panicked sound and bolted. He sprinted full speed across the foyer, heading directly for the private elevator. He slammed his hand against the call button, repeatedly mashing his palm against the glowing panel as if hitting it harder would make the elevator arrive faster. He was panting heavily, sweat pouring down the sides of his face, completely abandoning any shred of dignity he had left. "Come on," Kendrick muttered frantically under his breath, staring at the heavy steel doors. "Come on, open up." But I had already anticipated his cowardice. When the concierge called up earlier to announce their sudden arrival, I did not just tell him to send my family up. I also sent a secure text message to my personal security detail. The soft, elegant chime of the elevator echoed through the foyer. Kendrick let out a gasp of relief and stepped forward, ready to sprint into the cabin and flee the building. But as the heavy steel doors smoothly slid open, his escape route was entirely blocked. Two of my private security guards were already standing inside the elevator. They were both massive, imposing men, dressed in immaculate black suits, with earpieces discreetly tucked into their ears. They did not move. They simply stood shoulder to shoulder, forming an impenetrable human wall of solid muscle. They looked down at Kendrick with absolutely zero expression on their faces. Kendrick froze, his eyes widening in pure horror. He took a stumbling step backward, his hands raised instinctively in front of his chest. "Going down, sir." One of the guards asked, his voice a deep, rumbling baritone that offered absolutely no room for negotiation. Kendrick could not speak. He slowly backed away from the elevator, returning to the center of the foyer, his shoulders slumping in total defeat. He realized there was nowhere left to run. The lobby downstairs was entirely secured by my staff, and the federal authorities were likely already waiting for him to step outside. He was completely trapped. Jasmine, seeing her husband's pathetic failed escape attempt, realized that the situation was entirely hopeless. Her primary source of funding was going to federal prison. Her parents were entirely bankrupt. Her perfect social image was permanently destroyed. And the sister she had spent 35 years actively bullying was the only person standing in the room holding a life raft. She abandoned her pride entirely. Jasmine scrambled across the cold marble floor, crawling on her hands and knees toward me. Her expensive designer dress twisted awkwardly around her legs, and her flawless makeup was completely ruined, stained with dark streaks of mascara running down her cheeks. She closed the distance between us, reaching out with trembling manicured hands, and physically grabbed the fabric of my silk pants. "Nia, please," Jasmine begged, looking up at me with wild, desperate eyes. "Please, you have to stop this. You have to call your lawyers and tell them it was a mistake. Tell the government you acquired the debt and you want to settle it privately. You can afford to make this go away." I looked down at her. I felt the weight of her hands pulling on my clothes. It was a pathetic, disgusting display. "Jasmine," I said, my voice completely devoid of any warmth, "let go of me." She gripped the fabric tighter, her knuckles turning white. "No!" Jasmine shrieked, her voice cracking with raw panic. "I will not let go until you promise to help us. We are family, Nia. We are blood. You cannot do this to your own flesh and blood. You are supposed to protect us. Mom and Dad raised us to stick together. You cannot send my husband to prison and leave me with absolutely nothing. We are blood, Nia." The blood card. It is the ultimate toxic weapon deployed by abusive families right at the exact moment they realize they have lost all control. They spend decades treating you worse than a stranger, tearing down your self-esteem, stealing your peace, and mocking your struggles. But the second you establish a boundary or hold them accountable for their actions, they suddenly remember that you share the same genetics. They weaponize the concept of family to demand a level of blind loyalty they absolutely never offered to you in return. I looked at Jasmine clinging to my leg, crying about blood and family. I remembered being a teenager sitting alone in my bedroom listening to her and my mother laughing about how ugly my prom dress was. I remembered working 3 exhausting jobs to pay off the student loans that my parents forced me to take out so they could fund Jasmine's lavish destination wedding. I remembered the cold, arrogant voicemail Brenda left me just last night, telling me I was too embarrassing to sit at their New Year's Eve table. Where was this deep loyalty to our bloodline yesterday, Jasmine? I asked, my voice dropping to a freezing, quiet whisper that forced her to stop crying and actually listen. Where was your dedication to family when you were sitting at the country club sipping champagne and actively planning to leave our parents homeless in a trailer? Jasmine opened her mouth to speak, but she had absolutely no excuse. Her lips trembled as she searched frantically for another lie to spin, but her brain was completely empty. Where was this incredible sisterly bond when you stole Jamal's social security number and ruined his credit score so you could fly first class to Dubai? I continued staring directly into her terrified eyes. "You do not care about blood, Jasmine. You only care about blood when you are the one bleeding. You only care about family when you need someone else to pay your massive bills. I took a deliberate physical step backward, forcefully pulling my leg out of her desperate grip. Her hand slipped off the silk fabric and she collapsed forward, resting her hands on the marble floor. You banned me from the family table when you thought I had absolutely nothing, I said, delivering my final crushing monologue. You told me I did not dress the part. You told me I would make your wealthy friends uncomfortable. You wanted me to stay in the dark and eat your leftovers because it made you feel powerful to treat me like a peasant. I gestured around the massive $12 million penthouse, taking in the floor-to-ceiling windows and the crystal chandeliers. But the reality is, Jasmine, I own the entire building now. I bought the table, I bought the chairs, and you absolutely do not get a seat. Jasmine let out a long, agonizing wail, covering her face with her hands, as the sheer permanence of my rejection finally set in. Reginald and Brenda, who had been watching this brutal exchange from the sidelines, finally realized that their golden child could not save them. They realized that their entire future, their housing, their food, their basic survival rested entirely in my hands. The shift in their demeanor was immediate and entirely sickening to witness. Brenda slowly pushed herself up from the floor. She wiped her face, taking a shaky breath, and tried to walk toward me. Her eyes were completely bloodshot, and her expression was molded into a mask of deep, pathetic sorrow. Nia, sweetheart. Brenda whimpered, her voice shaking. Please listen to us. We made a terrible mistake. We were blinded by Kendrick and Jasmine. We trusted them and they manipulated us. But we are your parents. We have always loved you deep down. You know we love you. Please do not turn your back on us now. Reginald stood up from the velvet dining chair. The authoritarian patriarch was completely gone. He walked over and stood next to his wife, nodding in agreement. His shoulders were slumped and he looked like a broken old man begging for spare change. Your mother is right, Nia, Reginald said, his voice entirely stripped of its usual booming confidence. We made mistakes. We were too hard on you sometimes, but we just wanted you to be successful. We pushed you because we knew you had potential. Look at what you built. You are a billionaire. We are so incredibly proud of you. Please, you have to forgive us. We have absolutely nowhere else to go. I stood there looking at the two people who brought me into this world. They were actively trying to rewrite 35 years of emotional abuse in less than 30 seconds. They were trying to claim credit for my massive success, arguing that their constant rejection was somehow a brilliant parenting strategy designed to make me stronger. It was the ultimate form of gaslighting, and I watched them do it with total, complete detachment. You are not proud of me, Dad, I said, my voice perfectly steady. You are just terrified of being poor. And Mom, you do not love me deep down. You just love the fact that my bank account is currently the only thing standing between you and a homeless shelter. You did not make a mistake. Forgetting to pick someone up from the airport is a mistake. Systematically tearing down one child while funding the fraudulent lifestyle of another child for 3 decades is a deliberate choice. Brenda let out a soft sob, shaking her head. Please, Nia, she whispered. I held up my hand, silencing her instantly. I am not going to let you sleep on the street, Mom, I said, establishing the final ironclad boundary. I am not a monster, and I am not like Jasmine. Early this morning, before you even arrived, my legal team purchased a very modest, secure condo on the outskirts of the city. The deed is held entirely in a blind corporate trust. You and Dad will be allowed to live there rent-free for the rest of your natural lives. A small monthly stipend will be provided for your groceries and basic utilities. You will not starve and you will have a roof over your heads. Reginald let out a massive sigh of relief, thinking he had finally secured his safety. Thank you, Nia, he said quickly, taking a step forward. Thank you so much. We will make this right. We can start over. You misunderstand me, Dad, I said, taking a step back, keeping the physical distance between us. The condo is not an invitation to start over. It is a permanent severance package. Reginald's relief vanished instantly, replaced by confusion. You will live in that condo, I explained, looking at both of my parents with cold finality. But you will never have my new phone number. You will never know the address of this penthouse or any other property I own. You will never be invited to my home for holidays. You will never meet my future children. If you attempt to contact me at my corporate offices, my security team will have you escorted off the premises immediately. You are receiving basic shelter, and in exchange you are giving me my absolute permanent peace. You are entirely dead to me. Brenda let out a horrific scream, falling back onto the sofa. Reginald stared at me, his mouth opening and closing wordlessly as he realized the absolute finality of my terms. They were getting exactly what they gave me for my entire life. Cold, distant, transactional survival without a single ounce of actual love. I turned my attention to the two massive security guards waiting patiently by the open elevator doors. "We are completely finished here," I announced, my voice echoing clearly through the massive room. "Please escort all four of these individuals out of my building. If Mr. Kendrick attempts to flee, detain him in the lobby until the federal authorities arrive to take him into custody." "Yes, Miss Nia," the lead guard replied, stepping out of the elevator and walking purposefully toward the group. Kendrick did not fight. He was completely catatonic. The security guard simply grabbed him by the back of his expensive suit jacket and hauled him toward the elevator like a stray dog. Jasmine tried to scream my name one last time, reaching out toward me, but the second guard stepped between us, firmly grabbing her arm and guiding her away. Reginald and Brenda followed behind them, walking like zombies, completely shattered by the reality of their new, impoverished, isolated existence. I stood in the center of my foyer and watched them get loaded into the elevator. Not a single one of them looked back at me. The heavy steel doors slid shut with a soft metallic click, entirely cutting off the sound of Brenda's weeping. The penthouse fell into a deep, beautiful silence. The toxic, suffocating energy they had brought into my home was completely gone. I took a long, slow breath, feeling the clean air fill my lungs for the first time in my entire life. I turned around and looked at Jamal. He was standing by the floor-to-ceiling windows watching the city below. He looked over his shoulder at me, and a slow, genuine smile spread across his face. The war was finally over and we had won. 6 months have passed since that explosive New Year's Day. I am currently sitting in the plush leather seat of my private jet. The quiet hum of the engines is the only sound as we cruise at 40,000 feet. I am holding a crystal glass of vintage champagne, but this time I am not drinking it alone in a sparse staging unit. I am heading to Paris to celebrate this year's New Year's Eve with my chosen family, a tight circle of friends and colleagues who respect my mind and fiercely protect my peace. I reach over and tap the digital screen built into the armrest, pulling up the live global news feed. The financial network is running a breaking story, and there is Kendrick. His face is plastered across the screen, looking 10 years older and completely defeated. He is no longer wearing his custom Italian suits and flashing expensive imported watches. He is wearing a standard-issue federal jumpsuit, walking out of a downtown courthouse, surrounded by federal marshals. The headline at the bottom of the screen reads, "Former wealth manager indicted on 72 counts of wire fraud and embezzlement." The trial is officially set for next spring, but the prosecutors already announced they have an airtight case heavily supported by high-definition audio evidence. Kendrick tried to negotiate a plea deal, but the Securities and Exchange Commission was not interested in bargaining with a man who stole from the elderly. His firm has been entirely liquidated, and his precious reputation is permanently destroyed. He is looking at 20 years minimum in a federal penitentiary. And then there is Jasmine, the golden child who truly believed she was destined to live in a luxury waterfront villa in Dubai. After the federal government froze all of their joint bank accounts and seized their sprawling estate, her reality fractured permanently. She could not afford her country club dues or the lease on her luxury cars. Her wealthy friends abandoned her the exact second the fraud went public, treating her like an absolute pariah. She had absolutely no marketable skills and a resume that consisted entirely of hosting lavish dinner parties with stolen funds. Today, Jasmine is working a mid-level retail job at a suburban shopping mall. She spends her days folding sweaters and dealing with angry customers. She lives in a cramped 400-square-foot studio apartment on the other side of town. I heard through the legal grapevine that she tried to reach out to our parents for financial help, but Reginald and Brenda are in absolutely no position to save her anymore. My parents are still living in the secure condo my trust purchased for them. They have a solid roof over their heads and food in their pantry, but they live in total complete isolation. They cannot brag to their neighbors about their rich son-in-law. They cannot host extravagant holidays to show off their flawless family. They spend their days sitting in a modest living room, entirely alone with the heavy, agonizing consequences of their own toxic parenting. True to my word, I never gave them my new phone number. I have not spoken a single word to them since the morning my security guards escorted them out of my penthouse. The only person from my bloodline who made it to the other side of the fire is Jamal. We had breakfast together yesterday morning before I headed to the airport. He looked healthier and happier than I had ever seen him. After the identity theft charges against Jasmine and Kendrick were officially processed, Jamal was finally able to clear his ruined credit score. But he did not have to go back to the bank to beg a loan officer for capital. I personally provided the seed funding he needed to launch his logistics company. I did not give it to him out of pity or guilt. I invested in him because he had a brilliant business plan and an incredible work ethic that our parents always ignored. In just 6 months, he has already secured 3 major corporate contracts and hired his first fleet of commercial drivers. He is finally building the beautiful, successful life he deserves, completely free from the suffocating shadows of our family. I look out the window of the jet watching the thick white clouds drift by far below us. I reflect on everything it took to get to this exact altitude. For over 3 decades, I let my family dictate my worth. I let them convince me that I was a secondary character in my own life. I thought I had to prove my value to them by shrinking myself, by accepting their emotional scraps, and by staying perfectly quiet while they tore me down. But the greatest weapon I ever possessed was the very silence they forced upon me. While they were busy performing for the world and spending money they did not actually have, I was building an empire in the dark. I learned that true power does not roar. True power works relentlessly behind the scenes, securing the foundation, calculating the variables, and preparing for the exact moment the undeniable truth needs to be revealed. Walking away from people who share your DNA is one of the hardest things you will ever have to do in this life. Society conditions us to believe that family is an unbreakable bond, no matter how much severe abuse they inflict upon you. But blood does not give anyone a free pass to drain your spirit, steal your peace, or actively sabotage your future. Sometimes, to truly save yourself, you have to be willing to walk away from the table entirely. You have to be willing to let them call you the bad guy. You have to be perfectly okay with being the villain in their fabricated story if it means you finally get to be the hero in your own reality. I take a final sip of my champagne as the pilot announces our initial descent into Paris. A brand new year is about to begin, and for the very first time in my life, I am stepping into it completely unburdened. Have you ever had to walk away from toxic family members who only valued you for what you could do for them? Did you ever have to be the villain in their story to protect your own peace? Drop your story in the comments below. Do not forget to hit subscribe for more stories of setting ironclad boundaries and taking back your power.